just left him here first.
Yeah, Nicole. put
Oh,
that
okay.
for us.
Okay, okay, got it.
Part of our packet.
So, and I do have those. Yeah, they should be on it.
We ready over there? Seeing it is 5:30, we will call the Thursday, February 22nd, 2024 Planning Commission meeting to order. First order of business is approval of minutes from February 8th, 2024. Do I have a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I second.
All right, any discussion on this? All righty, and I am going to abstain as I was not here that day. Are we all in favor of approving them?
Aye.
All righty.
Aye.
All righty.
Aye.
4 ayes, 1 abstention. And do we have anyone online, public? All right. As we have no one in person or public, we will not have any public comment. And before we go to our first action item, I would just like to thank Vice Chair Curis for an excellent leading of the last meeting. I did watch it online and you guys did a great job. It was informative, it was concise, and really good job. Thank you very much. All righty, so action item 1, deliberations, Deschutes County 2040 Comprehensive Plan Update. Nicole Mardell, Senior Planner.
Right. Good evening, commissioners. For the record, Nicole Mardell, Senior Planner. So this evening, based on the feedback from February 8th, we've brought back a matrix with essentially all the remaining items for deliberations. So originally we had planned to hold 2 separate meetings to kind of split some of this up, but we decided based on the pace that the Planning Commission is going that we combine them. So tonight we'll touch on recreation, economic development, housing, destination resorts, and energy. And then we're also going to be looking at some specific comments that we received from Central Oregon Irrigation District. I wanted to note, I put this in the packet as well. But before I put their November 30th letter, there were quite a few edits in there that were terminology based or clarifying their role that we were comfortable just adding into the comprehensive plan. But there are about 3 items that, maybe took a specific stance on an issue or presented a certain perspective that we wanted Planning Commission feedback on. But otherwise, we are recommending the rest be directly incorporated. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or we can jump into the,
I just want to make sure, basically, that I look at it, the video is meeting officially open. So, the people that may be watching online, are they able to see the diet? Well, to see the diet, all we're seeing is the screen. They can, okay, just, okay, just want to make sure that they're not staring at the screen. Staring at a screen that acknowledges the meeting moving short.
Say that again.
Well, I'm sorry for not being clear, but the screen that we're all seeing there.
here we are.
Perfect, thank you.
Any questions, commissioners, before we start? I have one, Nicole, and it is based on a couple of items a little further down. Would you prefer that I ask that when we get there, or can I generally ask it right now?
I'd say it's up to you if it's kind of just generally wanting to address something before we jump in, ask it. If it's more like maybe I'd suggest waiting until we drop into.
I'll wait till we get to those items. All right, let us begin. Item number 1, should policy language be added to require collaboration among city, county, and state agencies on recreation topics? And this is policy 815. Any discussion?
Yeah, could somebody explain the new language would affect how it's currently being done and what the changes might be?
Yeah, certainly. So currently the language was drafted just to promote a culture of coordination between different agencies, in particular on recreation planning. We had a commenter who wanted coordination to be required among agencies specifically. So the new language adds in, a requirement based on that feedback, but staff recommends retaining the language as currently drafted. We have some concerns about enforcing that requirement. We don't really have the authority to do that. And also, for instance, I'll use a school district board as an example. Some groups, agencies don't have staff resources to be able to participate in planning processes at times. So they may triage and participate in some, but not all. So we have concerns that adding that requirement could potentially invalidate a process or cause some, kind of a burden on some of our agencies that's unintended. So we'd recommend retaining the current language in this one.
I guess that was my concern is thou shalt could create some legal issues with regard to if it's unavailable or can't be done. And I kind of personally prefer the current language.
I second that.
I'm in agreement as well. So we shall skip over item 1 and keep current language. Okay. Item number 2, should a specific policy be added to support the footbridge tentatively planned near the southern edge of Bend's urban growth boundary? Commissioner Cyrus?
Similar question. It's my understanding there may be some state statute and I know there was a big fight, both legislative and elsewise when that came up before. Kind of what's the status of that?
Commissioner. So to tee up this issue, I would say that it's staff's perspective that, the comprehensive plan is intended to be higher level. We're intended to look, holistically at an issue and provide that higher level guidance. Creating a specific policy for a specific project, in particular a transportation project, seems to be more fitting for the county's transportation system plan. The board recently deliberated on that transportation system plan and recommended, by reference, adoption of Bend Parks and Recreation District's master plan, including this project. But they also noted during that discussion that it is a Bend Parks and Recreation District project that's currently not even in the design phase. So it'd be on BPRD to design it, fund it, construct it, including seeking land use approval, in which there'd be a full review of state statute, Oregon administrative rule. I believe previously there was some concerns about the scenic waterway status for this section. So I would say that that's definitely an issue that would come up if this were proposed by BPRD, but our recommendation as staff in terms of the policy is just to maintain the current language that we have today, which is essentially talking about, participating in regional recreation planning, trying to reduce barriers where possible, just in our coordination. But again, we feel that this specific item would be a little bit out of place in the comprehensive plan.
I guess I would tend to agree that this is like I say, getting down in the weeds instead of the level that comp plan should be.
Agreed.
All righty, we shall move on and retain staff language. Should a policy be added to limit trails near farm and forestry operations? If yes, the Planning Commission may recommend option A, policy XY, explore additional requirements such as buffers to limit impacts from regional trail projects to nearby farm and forestry operations. If no, the Planning Commission may recommend retaining current language. Vice Chair Kuras?
So as an alternative to that suggested policy there, I think I'm kind of curious to see what people might think about changing the wording to make it seem a little bit more balanced. Like right now it says prioritizing recommendations from local parks, districts, county, state, and federal recreation plans and studies. I'm just wondering about what if it were to just say something, not to get into the wordsmithing thing, but something with the spirit of you know, balancing recommendations from local parks districts, et cetera, with farm and forestry operations or with the needs of farm and forestry operations, so that we're at least acknowledging in there that that there's quite a lot of tension really between people who want trails and people who don't want trails going through farm and forestry or disrupting farm and forestry practices. It doesn't seem like that tension is reflected in a general sense in these policies. So from the eagle eye perspective, it might be nice to have those, since we're kind of keeping track of all of the different ideas that have been presented. And that was a pretty big one.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Yes.
And I would tend to agree. There needs to certainly be some balance in this process. And I like the idea of trying to figure out how to create some buffering areas and protections. You know, on the one hand, if you've got a resource zone where those zones are for farm and forest practices, then you put a public trail, for example, right next to it. Now you have just created a buffer on the farm because you can't spray, et cetera, right up to the edge of the trail because of those uses. I know it's a big issue right now in the Willamette Valley. Big fight over expansion of UGBs, et cetera, because the buffer that's then imposed on the farm adjacent to the UGB because of the subdivision basically creates a no man's land of ground that can't be farmed because of the restrictions. And so I know the legislature is currently looking at language that would require buffers the opposite direction. They would require subdivisions, trails, public areas, et cetera, to buffer against the farm ground instead of the farmer having to buffer from the public uses. So the concept is currently being discussed statewide with regard to a much stronger right to farm language in the legislature right now. So I don't think we would be out of line to require that some of these facilities, I mean, be set back away from the resource zones.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I've been, I've been thinking about this, a lot too with these, we've had this come up in prior discussions as well. And I very much respect that farmers need to farm their land and that they have certain practices that contradict or are potentially harmful to the public. What I also keep coming back around, and I totally, wouldn't want to hinder farmers. I'm just always curious, like how much a percentage of the trails are next to these resource lands, how much of, it's very depending on where the trail goes. There's a lot of different, users, I guess, or property owners. So I keep thinking about that too. The other thing I keep thinking about is this like a recreation issue, or is it a fear of homeless population issue? And I just don't want decisions to be made that limit recreation and transportation because of fear of homeless, issues. And that to me should be a different topic. So these are just some different thoughts in my mind as I'm trying to go through this. Just I'm kind of speaking, stream of consciousness here. And I like your suggestion of trying to find some kind of balance. And so I'm curious to, explore that more.
So I do know that we address homelessness and housing further into this. I understand definitely what you're saying, and Commissioner Cyrus is right that they should not be restricted on their property. Vice Chair Karras, you're definitely correct that this is a very contentious issue. I don't know that I feel comfortable going for option A. I more am comfortable with Chair Karras's alternative because again, this is just an eye in the sky view of our county. and I know we're not the, we're not the rule makers when it comes down to it. But I know it's contentious and I know we have both sides and we do really want to try to balance what all of our constituents want.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just my 2 cents is not a lot of words, but I'm in agreement with Commissioner Cyrus's comments.
All right.
And Madam
Yep.
Chair,
Go ahead.
I would point out that it does say explore.
Mhm.
It doesn't necessarily say anything about imposing strict requirements or whatever, but it does suggest that we take a look at how we can better protect agriculture. And Deschutes County currently has one of the strongest right to farm ordinances on the books anywhere in the state. And all this does is recognize the right to farm issues and the fact that it's kind of maybe raises the flag a little bit that when there's being a public project being proposed near a resource ground, that it raises the awareness on how we can minimize or mitigate the conflicts.
So if option A were adopted, would it be something like 8.1.2 B? It would not replace 811 and 812, would it?
It would be an additional policy added to that chapter. We just kept it as XXX so that we avoided, getting numbering out of order.
Vice Chair Curris, would you be amenable to maybe doing an alternative to 8.12 and also considering option A?
I mean, I think I think I'd be fine with that. I'm trying to decide. I think in terms of the process, I'd really like to see if it seems like most people were kind of maybe leaning toward being okay with emphasizing a balance in 8.1.2, but I think there might be some value in asking everybody yes or no on this additional policy here, because sometimes when you've, for lack of a better word, force people to pick one way, like right now I'm like, but if you were to ask everybody and they had to say yay or nay, then that would kind of force people to land somewhere, and then we could land somewhere instead of sort of being like.
So because we can't like introduce new information now that we're in deliberations, I'm going to ask Nicole a question. And if it's an acceptable question to be answered, maybe someone here at the table could answer it. And if it's not acceptable to be answered, we won't answer it. So depending on the type of farming that occurs and the type of spraying that occurs, what is a general distance that a farmer would have to pull back on production of their land if they were not allowed to infringe upon a trail close to their property? Is that a question I can ask?
That is in the record because we did discuss that. I can't remember the number, but I remember
Okay.
discussing it.
I guess commissioners, I'm not sure if that is in the record. I think maybe it was in the TSP.
Oh, you're right. That's what it was.
But I would look to Peter. I would say, for the purpose of your question, I would say that is getting a little bit in the weeds.
And the reason I asked is that answer might sway me one way or another on how I make a decision
It's 5 feet versus.
versus half a mile or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not sure just because I wasn't involved in that particular record.
And Peter, do you feel that's a question I can ask?
No. The planning commission is engaged in a really important topic, as expressed by all the commissioners who have offered testimony this evening. The right to farm really, as Commissioner Cyrus acknowledged, if you've got right to farm, you can farm up to that very edge without as I understand it, without implicating those that are passing by, whether there's a recreational trail or someone's driving with their windows down and they experience the fertilization that's occurring on the property, for example. So, it's hard for me to project that a regional trail is going to then compel a farmer to set back their operations. I think in the execution of a regional trail, you would get into conversations about maybe a conservation easement that's granted by the property owner, or you're getting into really the minutia of how this regional trail system in a community-led process could intersect private property in a way that ensures that the trail expectations are maintained, but that the farming operations are intact and not compromised. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I don't know if you want to get it. I don't think we can give you the distances. I don't think that there was distances acknowledged in the testimony. I think to Commissioner Karras's desire to try to acknowledge, I'm not sure if you used the word tension, but there was quite a dynamic between this issue on multi-use trails, on resource respected property. And, if anything, I mean, I think the conversation that you're having right now is a good one. I'm not sure staff can lead you to one outcome because you're getting into a value judgment there. But you are capturing the essence of what occurred certainly at the TSP update, what was communicated here. And the question is, if you want to just acknowledge that a process in collaboration should underscore farming and forestry perspectives. I mean, you could elevate that. I mean, the policy 8.1.2 partners assumes that that's the property owner, the neighbor, and I'm that may be a little presumptuous. So you could wordsmith 8.1.2 in a way that elevates the importance of engaging the affected property owner or property owners to ensure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that, as I'm looking at you, Commissioner Karras, that's something that you were trying to find a way of really acknowledging that input is important in when we're talking about a multi-use regional trail system throughout our county.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just to clarify, the intention of what my suggestion was, it seems like when I'm reading 8.11 and 8.12, these policies seem to really emphasize developing parks and recreation projects, like reduce barriers to regional parks and recreation projects, et cetera, and then collaborate with partners to develop a regional system of trails and open spaces, prioritizing recommendations from local parks districts, et cetera, other recreational plans. All of the other policies in this document are like, balancing this with that and balancing this with that on any other issue of contention. So it's, even though I'm quite the fan of trails and recreation projects in general, I just think that if we're following the general gist of the plan, it would be nice to just acknowledge both of those and say, like, hey, this is an issue in our county that we uncovered recently. Well, not recently, but we really highlighted and emphasized recently in our public processes. So we don't want to lose track of that by saying at Deschutes County, we're all in for, let's just develop everything for recreational. That's the only view out there. I think I'm sort of leaning away from adding the additional policy, although I definitely will not be mad at anyone if everyone disagrees with me on that. It makes sense to me, but only from the point of view that it just seems a little bit more detailed than some of the other policies. So issues aside, or what I would vote on if we're developing trails right now, completely set aside, it just seems like a little bit deeper of a level of detail. And then to balance that out, we've had to add more detail on how we're going to protect trails and recreation side. So let's just keep it at the eagle eye level. Those are my thoughts. So I guess I probably, if you were asked me to choose one way or the other on the additional policy, I'd probably say no to that personally.
Special legal counsel.
Oh, yes. Let me bring you
You had
all
your
back.
hand up?
I did. Thank you. I just wanted to let you know that I'm online and watching and hearing some of the discussions and some of the questions. B, I think that Peter addressed the questions, and in fact, I think Vice Chair Kieras also kind of worked her way through some of the tensions. You know, I mean, we have different components in the comprehensive plan, and this is the component on recreation. And so, you know, it's going to be basically touting all the great things about recreation. You know, in the resource lands area, you know, we're going to be talking about how important it is, you know, to protect those resource lands. You know, I don't know really as far as like the setback distances and some of those specific questions that were asked. I don't know, A, that it's in the record, and B, even if it was, you know, I don't know that that would necessarily, in my opinion, that wouldn't necessarily address the tension between these two components of the comprehensive plan, you know, resource lands and protections of those. And then, you know, this obviously this section of the plan is focusing on recreation. So I don't know. I mean, I had my hand up earlier, and it seems like the questions that might have been, you know, that could have been addressed by legal have kind of been covered. So just a reminder, I'm online here, and if there are any other questions from a legal standpoint, you know, please don't hesitate to call me out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Vice Chair Kieras made a good point when she pointed out the fact that this calls for prioritizing. And I don't think any place else in our comp plan, it talks about prioritizing one issue over the other. And this creates much more concern on my part when I take a look at, you know, our right to farm statute. I mean, all of our ordinances rely on this as the foundation. And so, for example, if we've got policy in our comp plan that says that we prioritize recreation over all else, our right to farm ordinance can go out the window as not complying with the comp plan. And so we lose protections that we would otherwise have when we have language in here that says we're prioritizing one thing over the other. So I think it becomes critical then to either eliminate the prioritization of one over the other, or balance it by adding additional policy that says you're going to take a look at additional requirements to protect the resource lands, because otherwise they go out the window.
Nicole, I remember reading somewhere, and I don't know if it was in the packet or an email, but something had been mentioned about using like 3 or 4 specific words like balancing. And I want to say I just read it that, you know, for this meeting, I feel like I just can't remember where, but that staff would go through and comb out all words like prioritize. Am I misremembering something?
Good question. So that's item number 17, and that talks about should verbiage throughout the plan be strengthened to avoid misinterpretations. And specifically, we're talking about words like support, coordinate, and explore. There were some commenters who wanted us to take a step further, and, you know, use words like require, and, you know, that could in some places create a conflict between the comp plan and our code. Typically, you don't want the comprehensive plan to be, you know, very specific and require things, because again, it's meant to be that higher level policy.
So I think prioritize is kind of specific.
It could, I would say, you know, in the spirit of this discussion, zooming out a bit, it does sound like there's a desire for more balance in this policy. So I could see removing the word prioritizing from 8.1.2 and replacing it with balancing, and then adding to the end of this policy, you know, as several commissioners have mentioned, you know, balancing with the agencies listed here, their plans and studies, and, you know, property owner considerations or farm and forestry considerations. We as staff could work on that wordsmithing, but you could provide that direction to us. But I think what I'm understanding is the word prioritizing doesn't seem to fit there. So I think we're open to utilizing a different term.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I was actually gonna bring that up, so thank you for saying that. What if we sort of blended 8.1.2 and the proposed option, and wordsmithed it in such a way that included balancing the interest in developing a regional system of trails with right to farm and current, Commissioner Cyrus would have better wording on that, but the county's right to farm that is consistent with current Farm Bill. Whatever, I can't think of the word. Something like that. So we say, I think put actually the right to farm in there. And that we want to balance that with the interest in a regional trail system. But obviously getting rid of that word prioritizing, because I don't think that anybody likes it.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, if a person could wordsmith it in such a manner that there's some recognition maybe of county's right to farm ordinance, and or that these impacts or these placement of these things would not adversely impact resource grant lands, etc. I think that's the bottom line is, I mean, if you're saying as Peter had indicated that if you can farm right up to your fence line, then if you're applying a spray or something that may have a couple 100-foot setback or whatever, now you're closing those facilities that you've placed next to it for a period of however many days are required. I mean, some of the stuff that we used to use on potatoes, there was a 3 or 4 day exclusion period at which you didn't go near the field. But depending on the crop, it varies, without getting details on that. But, maybe as long as there's a recognition that the priority under our right to farm ordinance is the allowance for those agricultural practices to take place, that, even if it's a more of an education and awareness and that's where I was seeing this additional is more of just a flag that says, hey guys, pay attention that there may be some impacts. Because under right to farm, if you're not going to adversely impact the farming operation, and that farming operation, you put a ballpark next to a field and he's got the crop duster out there, you're going to run off all the games that you had scheduled for that day because of everybody freaks out because of planes flying over them. I mean, those type of impacts.
So might I say that we table item 3 so that the staff can work on rewriting it, or do I just say you guys go and rewrite it? Are we all comfortable with that? With a balance between a balance and a buffer, not a buffer, but is anyone in recommendation of the staff rewriting 8.1.2?
I was going to say, I think Nicole.
Or do you want to do a specific motion? And I'm fine either way.
I mean, I just want to know what it is I'm agreeing to
Yeah,
specifically, rather than
yeah.
just saying you guys rewrite. I mean, I don't need the direct wording in order to feel comfortable, but there's been 3 or 4 different ideas floated in terms of what we're balancing. There's a balance between the.
So Nicole, what do you have down that we are balancing?
I think there are 2 options that would be helpful to get commissioners' feedback on a preference on. The first option is to amend policy 8.1.2 to remove the word prioritizing with balancing. And then at the end of that sentence, add reference to coordination with property owners, including specifically farm and forestry operations. That's option 1. I would say option 2 would be similarly amend that policy, get rid of that prioritizing. But then it would take a step further and note, balancing those interests with private property owners, et cetera, and then also potentially exploring additional requirements to, limit impacts and preserve, right to farm. We can work on this, but, rights for property owners. So the second, from what I heard, was going a step further, incorporating some of that new option A, and I heard some interest in specifically referencing right to farm. Was that helpful and kind of great?
And Commissioner Altman, your feeling on 1 versus 2?
Would prefer the second.
And Vice Chair Curis?
Can you come back to me?
Yep, absolutely. Commissioner Cyrus?
Definitely the second one.
And,
For A.
all right. So
I
shall,
guess I'm gonna vote for the first one.
okay. Oh, So I would be the deciding factor. I don't like that.
Well, also, I mean, you're carrying forward some sort of information from this discussion to the board. So like, even if either way, it's three against 2.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're going to get the idea and really they're going to be able to decide.
Yep.
Maybe all 3 of them are all just like, definitely number 2.
Yes.
I would assume that the language that gets drafted would come back to us for a final looks good before it goes on.
Our great question, commissioners. Our approach was no, we were hoping to get direction from the commission and then utilize, our resources before going to the Board of County Commissioners hearing process to revise these policies and then update that document for the board. So that was a really great question just to manage expectations. I think, our goal through this process was to avoid getting into the wordsmithing. And so we were seeking more of that general direction. I would say if the Planning Commission felt very strongly about, wanting to wordsmith a policy, we could do that. But I would recommend not doing that for every policy.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
The reason why I am supportive of the first policy is since this is a document of goals and aspirations and not specific right to farm bills, or we're not, that's why I'm a little more supportive of that first one. It's just, I like the idea that, hey, let's bring in all the stakeholders to this conversation and have everyone at the table when we make these decisions. And I feel like that option A supports that kind of collaboration rather than being specific onto why we want each person at the table.
So, Madam Chair.
Yes.
So I would just throw this out there is if we choose to go with the first option, then I think I would believe very strongly that we would also want to take a look at the 811 where it says reduce barriers. Because I see that as similar to the prioritizing language in 812, where it basically puts a priority on the recreation over the other uses. Because if we're reducing barriers, I could see right to farm going out the window as a reduction in a barrier that could affect a recreational activity. And so the same argument is I'm fearful of losing the right to farm provisions in the county with these two, with 811 and 812.
Commissioners, if I may, I'd like to give a little context for 8.11. So this came from partially just over the years, we realized that our open space and conservation zone includes some really specific requirements that are really hard to measure. And they don't necessarily relate to farm and forestry operations. They use terms like carrying capacity, which, as we kind of heard through this process, is really hard to define and also enforce. So based on feedback from our regional parks and recreation districts and also our federal state agencies, this policy was intended to kind of take a look at those sections that are just difficult to interpret on both sides, from property owners, who are concerned about projects, from the applicants, and from staff. So I would say if there is concern about 8.1.1, it could be as simple as just, taking out reduce and putting in explore. I just wanted to note that it wasn't intended to prioritize one thing over the other in that specific policy.
And if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Commissioners, just another observation. I think you may want to reread the goal. Let me read goal 8.1, and I think we might be able to further pin that down. But right, the policies are further informing the goal. How do you implement policies can lead to implementation, but the goal is increase affordable, sustainable, and diverse recreational opportunities through partnerships with government and private entities. And you could change, if you were so inclined, private entities. What are we, private businesses? Are we talking about private entities including property owners or private property owners? And regardless if private entities is the right terminology to capture the important viewpoints and values and responsibilities that come with, if we're going to focus on farm and forestry operations. But it is the partnership that's emphasized by goal 8.1 that could then help inform how, if you want to delegate it to Nicole, with direction, how to further refine policies 8.1.1 and 8.1.2 to ensure that partnership, that collaboration is what we're underscoring. So I don't know, when I read 8.1, I was like, oh, okay, this is what we're trying to further define, what it means to have a partnership with these, we'll call them quasi-government entities, which they are, and private entities, private property owners, including, those that are, managing farm and forestry lands. Or again, it's up to you to determine how far you want to define that terminology. But I think it's the spirit of goal 8.1 that the rest of the policies there are 11 of them are trying to fulfill. I don't know, hopefully that was helpful.
Anyone else? I would be inclined to option 1, primarily because this is chapter 8 recreation. It's an eye in the sky ideal. I do know that farmers need protections. And I think if we can wordsmith this, it will show protections. And we do have a chapter on farming and agriculture that is protecting their rights. So I'm going to say we have 3 that want option 1 rewrite and 2 that want option 2 rewrite. And I think it should be noted to the Board of County Commissioners that this was a divided topic. All righty. Item number 4, should a policy be amended to consider balancing land, infrastructure, environment, and resource capacities with economic development? Currently, 911 is promote rural economic initiatives, including home-based businesses that maintain the integrity of the rural character and natural environment. Is anyone for option A here? Anyone? All righty, we will retain the recommended language. Okay. Item 5, should additional narrative text be added to recognize development and housing as key to promoting and growing the economy? And this is chapter 9, economic development. Any thoughts?
Well, did you have something to say?
Sure, I can tee this up, commissioners. It's a little bit different, kind of in the context of the matrix. So yes, we received a comment basically saying, hey, housing and development and the construction of housing is part of Central Oregon's economy. We did make some reference to it in one of our charts in the economic development chapter, but we don't have any concerns about adding more information. We think it would be valuable to add, maybe a sentence or 2 discussing how housing and development, the construction of housing impacts the economy. So we are supportive of adding some additional narrative text.
Anyone?
Well, after hearing you say that you're supportive of this, I would support it as well. At first I was like, well, is it that big a deal that we address? Isn't it kind of obvious? But so I'm not opposed of having a little narrative.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Vice Chair Curris.
I feel the same way. I read that staff has no concerns. So I was like, well, they're not concerned. I put down that I was neutral about it, but actually that was a really nice summary. So the way you put it does sound like it would be nice to have a sentence or something in there.
And I would be fine with that as well. I had written the word meh. And the reason the reason I did when I go down the middle column, you say you have commentors or an individual commentor. And so this was one individual commentor who expressed interest. So I was like, yeah, I'm one way or the other. But if we have a couple of commissioners who would be for it, I'm all for it. If you want to add one or two I read all of it again, and
I would tend to agree. I mean, bottom line is that is one of the largest sectors of our economy, and under this economic development section, it should be noted.
And my notes I have is demand has caused, housing to flourish. And I think that maybe to emphasize, like, that's the reason why it's so abundant is our demand.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Yes.
just to provide some context in terms of the statewide planning goals, obviously there's a statewide planning goal that pertains to housing, goal 10. And then there's economic development is goal 9. And I think the kind of central emphasis around economic development is looking for major employers, not to diminish the housing industry, but the employers that allow for people to live or relocate to an area that are tied to a diversified economy. And so, which, when you look at the table of, Central Oregon's largest private employers, that's something that there's a tremendous emphasis with economic development for Central Oregon. The regional large lot industrial program that was adopted in our region is really trying to maximize those basic sector industries that typically pay more than a living wage, which then allow families and companies to relocate to then diversify the economy. I'm not trying to diminish the comments that were made, but just goal 9 is when you think of cities that are planning for their next urban growth boundary, they're obligated to not only look at their housing need to make sure that they have a 20-year supply, but it's also to make sure that the land that's zoned for economic development, commercial, industrial lands, that they have an adequate supply and that it can be served so that the economy can continue to diversify. So again, just a planner's perspective in terms of what distinguishes goal 10, which is important. And of course, it has a major impact in our economy because we're such a destination. But goal 9, I think, is really focusing on those lands that allow for businesses to relocate, to expand, to establish themselves. So in the context of goal 9, you'll see it says in the 2000s, the building sector boomed as new housing was built to meet both increased housing demand and the real estate, speculation that followed. So anyway, I think it's helpful to give you that, or to remind you of that broader context. That the reason why we have an exclusive economic development chapter is to focus on the importance of ensuring that in a collaborative effort that we're promoting regional diversification to attract businesses and to maintain the ones that we have here.
I would say the majority of us are in agreement to add a little bit more information. Yeah, item 6, should the county integrate Central Oregon Land Watch recommended edits to rural commercial goal and policy language? And this was where I have my question. It's kind of items 6 and 7. OAR 660-024-0040 and 45. It discusses that the state came into agreement with Central Oregon regarding 9 large lot lands. And initially it was going to be 6 that would be developed. And I was just wondering, have all 9 been fully occupied yet?
I would say, Commissioner, that's a little bit of a separate question compared to 6 and 7.
Okay, so it's not applying to the same types of commercial properties or large lots.
I would say the large lot industrial provision, and Peter was part of this process, so feel free to jump in as well. But that was more so intended to allow for a specific process to rezone property, to allow for, a regional, employer of significance. So we did one
Like Facebook or something.
Right. Yeah. We did one of those in 2018 recently. I'm not familiar if there have been others. No, that's
When in Deschutes County?
in Deschutes County. But I would say that the core of the question in items 6 and 7, and this is a good item to raise, I would say this was raised by Commissioner Hovkamp in his items to add to the matrix. So we had several existing, pretty much all the policies have been carried over from the 2010 plan related to our rural commercial and rural industrial zones. These are zones that are allowed to have, industrial commercial operations, but have been deemed to be rural when we created the requirements in those code sections. So they're not in an unincorporated community like Tumalo or Terrebonne, but they're allowed to have, a processing facility or, I think like a truck stop is allowed in rural commercial. So the core of this question is that we created a goal for each of these because there previously wasn't a goal for some reason. So the goal that we created is support creation continuation of rural commercial for number 6 and rural industrial number 7. And Central Oregon Land Watch had a concern that it might be contrary to state law because there's concern that, an urban use could end up in one of these areas. We've found through, our code going to the Land Use Board of Appeals that it's not a concern, that it has been vetted that code is containing these uses properly. But we do agree that potentially, if you wanted to rework that goal language, since it's intended to summarize the policies that are carried over, you could just clarify as state law allows. That could be a simple fix in 9.2 option A. Or you could kind of change up the language. It basically does the same thing in option B. It just makes it more clear again. We're maintaining these areas as they're currently designated, as they've been vetted, and allowing for expansion if they meet state law.
Yes.
So about those edits, I was sort of thinking like what are some of the advantages of that? So this might be a question for Stephanie Marshall, but I'm not sure. So if it says as state law allows, just as example, do you think that reduces the number of things that have to go to the Board of Appeals? Like, I mean, is that likely to make people go, oh, okay, well, like if it's not in there, like if it doesn't say as state law allows, then does that encourage people to then say, wait a minute, I can do this, and then they go all the way up the thing and it says, well, but state law says you can't. So, or is it easier to just have it written there just for the sake of clarity for people that are doing these projects? I don't know if that question makes sense. Hopefully it does.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kieras. Hi, everyone. Stephanie Marshall again, Assistant Legal Counsel. I'm always in favor of having like a clarifying phrase, as state law allows, or even to the extent allowed by state law. I don't know that it necessarily means that you won't have, a situation where somebody goes all the way through and it's denied, or if you've got somebody who's opposed to an application, who's like, well, it doesn't matter to me if state law allows it or not, but I don't really know if I've answered your question, whether I think that it has an impact on the process. Maybe, possibly, but I think it really kind of depends more on the parties involved and if they're represented by counsel, and if counsel, advises them, hey, yeah, this would be a good fight or a good application to pursue.
That's helpful.
You might think of
Yes.
it, if Stephanie agrees, as a belt and suspenders approach. We've already got, we already know that state law applies to these, but we're just saying it again. So it's kind of the
Yeah.
double security method, if you will.
Maybe it's more of a question for me as a psychologist. You know, does this discourage people, or does this clarify for people's mindset of like,
And Nicole, I have one question. You said something to the effect of like, maybe Central Oregon Land Watch was concerned that an urban use could end up there. Would that be like an exception application or something, or
Right.
any business that establishes has to kind of talk to the county?
Correct. Yeah. So I would say we've had two attempts at rezoning into rural industrial in the last couple years. And in both of those cases, when they've gone to the Land Use Board of Appeals, again, it's been confirmed that within our code and within the comprehensive plan policies that outline use limitations, like this use has to be this square footage, only these types of uses are allowed. The Land Use Board of Appeals has confirmed, yes, this code will ensure that no uses are urban. But if someone were proposing a use that were outside of what's listed in our code and arguing for something like that, then that could lead to, potentially an exception process. But I'm not sure if we would allow that. But Peter, if you wanted to add.
Yeah, the one thing that I would remind the planning commission again is as you think about the construction of a comprehensive plan, goals are going to be general, policies are going to have a little bit more specificity, and then regulations are going to implement. They're going to have a lot of detail. Just for your consideration, look at what policy 9.2.1 says. Allow for new rural commercial zoning designations and otherwise allowed by Oregon Revised Statute, administrative rule, in this comprehensive plan. So it's getting to the very issue. I would make the argument that Landwatch is asking for in the goal. The policy is further refining what the intention of that goal is. And it speaks to as Stephanie noted, a little bit more of the belt and suspenders. The policy implements that goal. And we're clearly recognizing that and informing someone who wants to establish a rural commercial use that they've got to comply with state law. So I think you want to be mindful of how much specificity you want to get into a goal. If you feel like the goals is too ambiguous, or then you can wordsmith the goal. But as we just experienced with the policy conversation about the tension between regional park districts and property ownership, the opportunity to kind of flesh that out is not necessarily the goal, it's the policy. Because the policy.
I didn't catch on to it was goal 9.2 and not like policy 9.2.1. I didn't catch that. So
That's my observation.
you're talking,
We're certainly
goal versus the policies under the goal. So I just didn't catch that.
Sure. I mean, I think we're covered with existing language.
I'm ambivalent.
Commissioner Kelly?
I mean, I'm not opposed to suspenders with the belt.
yeah,
No, but
Because I
this
think of
is-
my grandpa, but
yeah. So this is what Peter was talking about. They're wanting to change goal, and then all the policy is what we have been discussing.
Sure.
So
Commissioner, we actually have been discussing the goal.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. On these other ones, it's been like policy 9.1.1. So it didn't register that this was goal 9.2, which is basically like, here's the header and then here's the chapter.
yeah, I'm pretty neutral.
Okay. So we're fine with keeping existing language?
Would this apply to 6 and 7?
Yes.
Yes, very similar. So 6 is just dealing with rural, and the second is dealing with rural industrial. They're essentially the same issue.
So item 7, should the county integrate Central Oregon Land Watch recommended edits to rural industrial goal language?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
same discussion. I think it's already covered.
Yep. In agreement? Still have to read them. Number 8, should policy language be amended to discourage short-term or vacation rentals? Currently, policy 1018, evaluate the impacts of short-term rentals and consider regulations to mitigate impacts as appropriate.
And I can tee this up, commissioners, and then I'll also have Peter add to this. So currently in the existing draft, we did hear about short-term rentals during the process, and we did draft a policy noting that we should evaluate, the impacts of these and, explore regulations. These are prohibited in farm and forest zones. There is case law on this. But I also wanted to note that the Board of County Commissioners has been discussing this. They discussed it as recently as yesterday. So Peter's been a part of that discussion. They're exploring whether or not to develop a review process for these. So as it's currently being discussed, we recommend retaining the current language so that, let's say, no action is taken. We're still, again, memorializing that this issue came up and allowing for it to be evaluated in the future again, if needed. But we wanted to avoid getting too ahead of, the board and creating a policy that's maybe too specific for the point in the process that we're in.
Well said. I don't have anything to offer.
I would concur.
Agree.
All righty, keep the language. Item 9, should the county amend policy language to better reflect collaboration with cities on affordable housing within urban growth boundaries? Policy 1042, partner with cities to incentivize development within urban growth boundaries and reduce infrastructure costs for workforce and affordable housing. And policy 1044, utilize county-owned land in city limits for affordable and workforce housing where appropriate.
I can tee this up
Absolutely.
again, commissioners. So I would say that the second policy, 10.4.4, that was, it's sort of reflecting current practice by the board. The board has utilized county-owned property in city limits for affordable housing. There was one approved, I think, off Simpson a year or so ago.
Correct. City of Bend, City of LaPine have all had donated land for organizations like Habitat for Humanity. So Deschutes County is very much where the county has resources is not necessarily with infrastructure, because we don't provide centralized water, we don't provide centralized sewer, but we have an abundance of land, and that those lands have been made available, and including the city of Redmond, for an affordable housing pilot project. So in 3 of the 4 cities within the last 24 to 36 months, the Board of County Commissioner has donated land exclusively for affordable housing. So 10.4.4 is in action as we speak.
Yes. Yeah. And just reflecting that value. And then 10.4.2 is talking about partnering with cities to incentivize development, inside urban growth boundaries as one of our housing strategies. I wanted to note that there are additional policies under this chapter that talk about rural housing as well. So 10.4.2 is kind of one of the tools in the toolbox there. We did hear some concern from commenters about wanting a policy that goes a little bit further and speaks to prioritizing development of housing in UGBs. So that's what you see in option A, is kind of trying to go a little bit step further of prioritizing collaboration with cities on affordable housing within UGBs because of that concern regarding mostly sprawl, I would say. But other commenters, just to provide the con to the pro in this situation, essentially noted, hey, we're in an ongoing housing shortage. We need all the tools in the toolbox that we can use.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I personally have a little bit of a problem with the 10.4.4 because there might be other uses and such of the county-owned land that might be more appropriate than housing. Other county facilities, especially as the cities grow and whether they, appropriate to trade to a city or a school or other specific facilities that may be more critical than housing. I think the 1044 is boxing the city in too much, and certainly would object to the proposal to prioritize it, because quite frankly, I mean, these are public lands, public resources, and I honestly have a problem. I would actually support deleting 1044 because I don't think the county should be boxed in. I think it should be on a case by case basis. I mean, if the county commissioners over the next 10 years decide this is the best use of lands, great. But I don't think the comp plan should say this is what you shall do with it.
Correct. And just, I definitely hear your concern, Commissioner. I would just note that the way we crafted the language was intended to note, that where appropriate. So, in our perspective, this is again, just noting a value, but it wouldn't add a requirement, and it wouldn't reduce opportunities to use county-owned land for other facilities. So that was intentional in the way that we crafted the language, but hear your concern.
And maybe I'm missing something because the 4.4 says utilize. It doesn't say where appropriate or if appropriate, or maybe there's a preference ahead of the 1044 that
At the end of the sentence, it does.
Where.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, we're good with that, but I would object to the prioritizing on the as proposed.
Anyone else?
I'm on board with the language as is, because I feel like partner with cities to incentivize is enough of a statement of our values.
We did just eliminate prioritize in another policy item.
I'm
Not a fan of
content.
prioritizing. Well, because then I feel like I feel like you then need to say, what are you prioritizing it over? Because there's all kinds of things you could be prioritizing that over, but I think you're saying prioritizing that over development in the county. I think that's maybe what I'm inferring, but it doesn't actually say that. So I would just be in favor of keeping the current language.
Me as well. Same already. Item number 10. Should the county add a policy to limit secondary accessory farm dwellings in the MUA 10 zone? And wasn't this just recently passed, not passed, rejected?
Yes, I can tee this one up. So currently in our MUA 10 zone, we do allow for secondary accessory farm dwellings through a manufactured home. This is a local permissive use. It doesn't necessarily come from statute or anything. So we are kind of just allowing it in our code based on our own values. Again, this came from our original zoning ordinance. So there was a question earlier about why manufactured homes, why not stick built? I was able to do a little bit of research just before this meeting, and our original zoning ordinance didn't include a lot of context. So it didn't have an exact statement of why manufactured homes compared to stick built. But I would infer that it was, I think for what some other commissioners inferred is that so it could be used temporarily and removed if needed, brought back if needed. So I believe that was kind of the answer to your question. Only a couple of properties have used this. I think it's only 2 throughout, since this was allowed in the late 70s. This recently came up in a hearings officer proceeding. That property did eventually get its approval, but we don't see it very often. So essentially the commenter, to provide some context, they just had support for limiting this type of housing. In particular, they just wanted to avoid more than one unit on a property in the rural county. So we would recommend retaining the current language as drafted because, again, it's not used that commonly. We see it as being appropriate in certain situations, but there is an option there if you wanted to explore this topic further. We created a policy that's worded in a way that would, again, promote that additional community conversation.
Any thoughts?
I just have a question. If you could provide just a little bit of information on what types of, what does the code say about this being allowed? I assume there are setbacks and accessibility requirements in the current code?
Yes, so it is allowed as a conditional use. And then there are some requirements generally related to, I believe it's the same setbacks as any other type of dwelling. Same with building height. So there aren't a lot of additional requirements, but the way that our conditional use chapter is currently laid out, there's some general standards about, harmony with the surrounding environment, et cetera.
And I would add, Commissioner, that and Commissioner Cyrus knows this far better than I do, but the multiple use agricultural 10 zones were this transition zone. They're exception lands, but they're a transitional zone between our what should be commercial farmlands and those lands that have some type of production going along with them. The reason why it doesn't happen that often is because these aren't commercial farms. These lands are largely smaller in nature. You might have a rural lotting pattern with them. And so the burden to try to demonstrate that you need an accessory dwelling to support another farm dwelling, the burden is then to demonstrate that you're putting that land primarily for the purpose of achieving or obtaining a profit in farming. And given the multiple use agricultural 10 lotting pattern, there are places where it has happened, and it does happen because of the size and maybe the productivity of the soil and the water rights that are there. But the built environment really, I think, makes it difficult to, and I wouldn't project that over the next 20 years, we're going to see a proliferation of these type of uses for the reasons that I just described.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, essentially the MUA is a residential zone. It's essentially a hobby farm zone. And so it's already, as was pointed, it's hard to meet that bar. I certainly wouldn't include or wouldn't increase the requirements because it's already a high bar to meet.
Is there like a farming income requirement as part of this? Like I know in EFU,
There is an EFU. To what extent in the MUA 10 there may be less rigor, but I think the implications of an accessory farm dwelling then in just the terminology implies that you're going to be needing this house to meet your farming needs, and then you're looking at the operation and whether or not they're
I guess theoretically I could see something, for example, an intensive greenhouse operation where you've got 50 employees working on your 5 or 10 acre parcel where you might need help with a caretaker or something like that. But yeah, it's going to be, I see no reason to raise what's already a very high bar.
I support that. I support the no.
I also support the no.
We'll retain,
Yes to the no.
moving right along. Okay, item 11, should the county amend policy language to address homelessness through partnering with agencies, providing services, outreach, and housing first strategies? 10.4.3 currently says partner with local, state, and federal agencies to address and limit nuisance and public health issues related to homelessness.
And I can tee this one up again, commissioners. So I would say that the current language as drafted, we, throughout our initial outreach process, we heard a lot about homelessness in two different contexts. We heard one in that, hey, we're in a housing shortage. Again, we should be supportive of housing where appropriate in the rural environment. That can help address the issue of homelessness. We also heard from other community members concerns about public health issues, some nuisance issues. The specific area of China Hat Road came up a lot during our first and secondary outreach activities. So the current policy specifically related to homelessness is in that lens of nuisance and public health, because we have other policies that are supportive of housing. This particular kind of item that was brought up by commenters is a desire for the county to address homelessness through providing services, outreach, et cetera. I wanted to note that those aren't necessarily governed by the comprehensive plan. We have a health department who does provide services and outreach, but it's not really in our realm of land use. And then they also noted a housing first approach, which is essentially providing a safe place to live without preconditions such as sobriety or drug treatment, et cetera. We feel that the current language as drafted is broad enough to support the intent of what these commenters was seeking. And we felt that the language, again, that was encouraged to be added, in part didn't fall under our purview with the services and outreach. And again, the housing first, we felt as though that was, potentially covered in the broad enough buckets of housing generally in our other policies.
I would agree.
I agree.
And keep the language the way it is.
Alrighty.
No.
Yes to the no. Alrighty, number 12. Number 12, should policy language be amended to list workforce, transitional housing, and secure shelter housing types in goals and policies, and or to advocate for changes to state law to allow shelter or safe parking areas outside of UGBs?
And I can tee
Yes.
this one up again. So there are essentially two questions at play here. So the first is a desire from commenters to advocate at the state level to allow for shelters and safe parking areas outside of urban growth boundaries. There was some desire to allow that because typically properties in city limits may not be of the certain size or have the certain requirements that you need for those sites. There has been some, so I will note that existing state law essentially provides quite a few limitations to that currently. So again, this would be a policy to advocate at the state level for that. The second question is about adding the terms transitional housing, workforce housing, et cetera, to our housing related policies to be more inclusive of those types. Again, we felt that our policies were broad enough to cover those if needed. We didn't feel the need to specifically cite them. I guess, well, we'll wait to see if you get questions. Thanks.
Anyone on the left?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time supporting adding this type of infrastructure, et cetera, outside the UGBs. I personally think they need to be kept in tighter to where the services are and it's public transportation, et cetera, et cetera. So you avoid some of the, Dirt Worlds 1 and 2 and China Hat and a few of the others. You start getting, major unsupported compounds outside the UGBs. So I guess I would lean toward opposing this.
One concern I have with option A is the CDD doesn't really have the resources to go fight at a state level right now to support changes to state law. To me, that means advocating.
Yeah, I would say it would be a representation of values.
Mhm.
So it could be actively advocating. It could be if a bill comes forward, noting our policy about that. Yes, so I would say, our staff recommendation, because I'm realizing, I'm not sure if it was clear here, is to maintain the language as currently drafted.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Alrighty. Yana. Item 13, should a policy be added to incorporate statutory language to limit creation and expansion of destination resorts within 24 air miles of Bend, except to provide housing for employees and management of the resort?
I can tee this one up as well.
Yep.
So commissioners, this was a widely discussed topic, I would say, during our community outreach process. There were quite a few participants, I should say, in our outreach activities who sought to create and implement additional requirements for siting of destination resorts, including additional limitations. So that led to the creation of the existing policy in the draft 1172, which notes, essentially creating and implementing additional requirements, but it doesn't include anything specific because, again, this is one of those topics that warrants quite a bit of community discussion, I would say. In the hearing process, you heard or you read certain commenters expressed a desire to put that specific cap on destination resorts, that there would be a limitation within 24 air miles. There was a desire from commenters that changing this in our comprehensive plan would better align with state law. On the other side, we had commenters noting there's some ambiguity in that state law, and essentially noting a desire not to limit destination resorts further. I wanted to note that the Planning Commission did review a proposal on this topic recently, specifically for the 24 air mile requirement. And the Board of County Commissioners ultimately voted to deny that amendment. The existing language we feel is a good middle ground approach, again, to explore some additional requirements without adding a particular limit on things without additional community discussion. But we did note, in your optional policy, a more specific policy that we would potentially call more of an action item, but we wanted to pose it just in case the Planning Commission wanted to consider it. But that would be essentially to review our code and comprehensive goals to confirm compliance with the relevant statute for siting of destination resorts. So that could dig into that specific air mile question and limitation.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
a question. So I'm looking at the plan under 11.7.4 mapping for destination resort siting. Maybe you could clarify or review this since it's been a little while, but before Ben got to 100,000, I know there was a lot of discussion that, like once it got to 100,000, then we wouldn't have any more destination resorts within 24 air miles. And then it came out that actually that would just depend on us adopting a new map, I think. Could you review that or summarize that?
So Stephanie Marshall, our legal counsel, is here, and I know that Stephanie was involved in the text amendment process and is very familiar with this. So Stephanie, would you mind addressing the question?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when the map was adopted by Deschutes County back then, that was the point in time in which we had to show that the areas mapped for a destination resort overlay were, met state statutory requirements. That requirement does not continue forward. That would only be like if we were to want to amend our map and put new areas on it. Then that new map would have to comply with what the factual circumstances are on the ground. It's not so much the requirements themselves, but the time at which you're looking at compliance with the state statutory requirements. It's a little bit nuanced, and there's definitely great attorneys on both sides making those arguments like, no, it carries forward. But we have had some LUBA decisions, particularly with respect to Thornburg, which is, no, you can't say no more approvals of Thornburg because it's a destination resort within 24 air miles of Bend, which has a population of over 100,000. So I don't know if my explanation is helpful at all, but hopefully I'm trying to capture, kind of the difference and what was before the county last year.
Yeah, so mainly, I have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
But mainly I'm asking for that to just sort of get reviewed and summarized because we do have some newer commissioners who maybe haven't been there during that time.
Right.
So does that make sense to other people, what she's saying about, okay. So I guess my question really is under 11.7.4, where it says mapping for destination resort siting, is the plan basically saying, hey, part of our plan here is to adopt a new map or make a new map? Is that what we're saying here? Or
A great question, Commissioner.
Yeah.
So the policy 1174 is retaining all of our existing language, and essentially just carrying it over. So it's not changing the date of our map and it's not creating a new map. It's essentially just bringing over our 2010 language as is to this comp plan.
Okay, last question. Then, so sorry, lost track of my question. I will come back to my last question. It looks like I'm just gonna see who you want to call on next because Peter's got his hand up.
If I may, Madam Chair, just to kind of complement what Stephanie and Nicole have offered. So just some more context historically, Deschutes County adopted its original destination resort map after state law was changed that allowed rural counties to create destination resorts in rural areas outside of the Willamette Valley. That was done in 1992. And in 2010, I think through the regular session in 2009, maybe a year or two earlier, the legislature changed state law that allowed counties to amend their destination resort maps outside of what was called periodic review. Counties are no longer in periodic review. That was eliminated in 2003. So at the direction of the board, staff, with input from the Planning Commission ultimately, and ultimately the board, with the board's approval, we changed some state criteria. We changed some local criteria. We established procedures for how one can amend a destination resort map. Both of those processes were done separately. They were appealed to LUBA and upheld. Once they were affirmed, it allowed applicants to apply to amend the resort map. We ended up taking off tens of thousands of acres voluntarily with property owner consent, and that had to do with the way the map was originally developed in 1992, incidentally by Eagle Crest. They were the applicant. But that's why Caldera Springs was identified as on the map, and it was subsequently they went through Caldera Springs. I'm sorry, their expansion that they did in last decade, and which has come into place as they are implementing it. It allowed them to expand. They brought in new property, and the resort map acknowledged that eligibility. It's important to acknowledge that the case law that came out of Thornburg, and Stephanie is so right, there are really good attorneys on both sides of this argument, but through the Thornburg decision, what we understand, what I will say, I'll speak personally, what I understand the court said is at the time that the county acknowledged its destination resort map, and that is true when we amended it, and it was up, our map was appealed, which included the Caldera lands for expansion. That was appealed. It was upheld and acknowledged. Upon that acknowledgement, regardless of when Bend hit 100,000 people or more, the map controls. So there is an interpretation that if someone wanted to come forward today, and we're not hearing any indication that that's happening, but if someone in the near future or in the future wanted to apply to become a destination resort, LUBA has indicated, and I think the Court of Appeals didn't overturn that argument or that finding or that decision, that the map controls. And so property owners can rely on that map today because it's an acknowledged document. It's an acknowledged inventory. And they could do so regardless of the fact that Bend's population is over 100,000. And if you apply the 24 air miles to it, it would preclude all future destination resorts from occurring. Now, the Board of County Commissioners considered the Central Oregon Land Watch text amendment, and a majority rejected it. And so that's the tension around the topic. But again, there are lawyers and passionate residents who believe that Deschutes County has the authority, has the ability to revisit its criteria to make new resorts either subject to more restrictive standards, which is item number 14, or to amend its map and its eligibility criteria to basically prevent any new destination resorts from occurring going forward. So I think it's important to acknowledge what some of the members of the public are asking for. They're asking the Planning Commission to consider a change that, if it was ultimately acknowledged by the board, would prevent any new destination resort or any expansion of an existing resort from occurring because of the criterion related to population, in this case in Bend, in the 24 air mile requirement.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I thought of my final question. So I think my question about the language in 11.7.2, create and implement additional limitations, et cetera, that go beyond, let's see here, go beyond current state regulations. So I'm getting stuck on the go beyond part. So I'm maybe looking for clarification on what I'm sort of stuck on, which is, I think like if we had, like, let's say that the board had voted differently, or if we did adopt a new map, we wouldn't really be going beyond state regulations. We would just be doing a thing within state regulations, right? Like we wouldn't be going above, and we would be doing something we don't really have to do as a county, but we wouldn't be like having even more strict laws than, I guess I'm talking myself out of it. Like, go ahead.
I think what 11.7.2 was intending to do is note that there's a lot of community member concern about destination resorts. The comprehensive plan is not where we're going to settle those concerns. So it's again one of those policies that's noting some of these tensions around a certain topic and promoting opportunities for exploring, additional requirements. I would say specifically what we heard are concerns about impacts to natural resources, water, et cetera. So that's why we worded the policy in that particular way. Is there ability for us to explore some additional local requirements that could address those concerns, regardless or not of where destination resorts are cited?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I can maybe address some of these things. First, I'd like to point out that I actually own some of the property affected by this, along with, lots of other people. There's literally thousands of acres that are affected. So while I do, have an interest in this, just want to put that on the record. I also served on the legislative work group that helped draft the state laws that created this process. And just as a background, the 24 air miles, it was a creative way to avoid destination resorts in the Willamette Valley. The original intent was not to restrict destination resorts in Eastern Oregon, but that was how they originally helped limit the valley siting, because they had so many cities over there, over 100,000 people. With that, and maybe I can summarize a little bit of the arguments of the understanding of whether or not this is a change. So basically, as the courts have upheld, is this 24 air mile of 100,000 designation was at the time the map was created. And every property that was mapped is grandfathered.
And rely on it.
And can rely on it. So by changing this, the text amendment would have ungrandfathered those properties. And that was the whole point, is to take them back off, make them ineligible after they were made eligible, and subject all of those properties to Measure 49 claims, which is why all of those properties got Measure 56 notifications, that the fact that they could qualify for Measure 49 had that passed. And so yes, it would have a significant impact on the properties that are already mapped. But going forward, anybody, if I were to come in with another piece of property and say I want to have it mapped as destination resort, then it would fall under the new rules.
Right.
So any properties that are mapped under whichever criteria at the time they're then protected and solidified and okay to move forward because that's the bundle of goods and rights that they had at the time. And so that's kind of any additional restrictions or requirements that we impose at this point would all be subject to Measure 49 claims as far as compensation for the additional restrictions and or lessening of the values that are put on those properties. And so I guess that's, I mean, that said, the one thing I do find with this whole discussion of the destination resorts and even the write-up, there's discussion about how, there is public opposition to resorts, but what's missing from the background is the significant amount of discussion that went into the language when the resorts were put in place. And in fact, the tours that were given to the legislative group of the different resorts, the economic values, the fact that destination resorts are one of the largest employers in Central Oregon, also one of the largest taxpayers. EDCO provided information regarding the fact that they relied on destination resorts as one of the keys to bringing new businesses to Central Oregon, because it's where a lot of the business owners and their, the corporate, your doctors, your lawyers, and a lot of people live. It's what makes Central Oregon the livable place it is. And I guess that was, some of the comments that were provided that didn't make it into the discussion with regard to the write-up online as a description is the benefits. Like I say, that's the one thing I would suggest, and I've seen records so I can talk to it, that it's absent of a lot of the benefits of the reasons why the county originally adopted the resort language and encouraged resorts at one point, because they were critical to the economy.
And we will discuss that in item 15.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I actually have a question for Commissioner Cyrus. This is coming from a sheer curiosity. But when they wanted to limit destination resorts on the west side, why? Like, why limit them there? And
They have class 1, 2, 3, 4 soils.
that was going to be my guess, but I was just curious.
That's the primary thing, had it strictly to do with the agricultural base of the Willamette Valley, and the fact that the Willamette Valley is the heart of agriculture in Oregon. And basically the thought was Central Oregon is and Eastern Oregon is the perfect place for people to come and recreate. So why not create, and especially in those days, it was the primary economic driver. It was before the property tax measures that switched over. I think it was Measure 50 that changed the way taxes are done. Quite frankly, it was a destination resort. Black Butte Ranch made Sisters one of the wealthiest school districts in the state. And one of the comments back then was every school district should have a destination resort to fund its schools because of the huge amount of tax base.
What can I ask? So just a question for Stephanie Marshall. So given everything that Commissioner Cyrus said, I just want to know if you have any comments or agree or disagree with any of, I thought that was like a really well formulated, I don't want to say argument, but like a really well formulated set of points. And so I just want to see if she has anything to say about that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Vice Chair. Yeah, I think, the way that Commissioner Cyrus described this, my concern would be that you have property owners that either purchased or have owned property that have that current ability, per the map that was amended in 2010 to, if they wanted to and they could meet the other requirements, potentially develop a destination resort. And so any new legislation that would be adopted by the county could diminish property rights, which is why the Measure 49 and Measure 56 notices went out when the board was considering a proposed text amendment last summer. And I don't know if there were other aspects of Commissioner Cyrus's comments. You know, I mean, it is, you know, my general statement would be that this mapping, you know, that was performed in compliance with state law back in the day, conferred certain sticks in the bundle of property rights that these property owners, you know, would you know, could argue, you know, look, I believe that I'm entitled to this because I'm mapped for this. So I don't know if that helps, or if you have follow-up questions on kind of, you know, what's in play here.
And no, that helps. It sounds like, yeah, you concur.
Yeah.
More or less, right? Concur
Right.
with what Commissioner
Right.
Cyrus was saying. So that's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't want to be on the defending side.
Okay, that's yeah.
Not to allow it, you know. I mean, I'm sure I could do a great job. As I said earlier, there's, you know, lawyers, you know, can make arguments on either side, but I really do strongly believe that these expectations are in place, and it would be difficult to impact them without some sort of legal ramifications.
Thank you. That helps so much.
Oh, good.
Thanks to both of you.
Yeah.
And I would note that as the staff states, existing language was drafted as a middle ground approach to promote further community conversation on this topic. So I would ask if anyone wants to yay the nay, or what our thoughts are. Do we have any thoughts on what we would like to think here on item 13?
I will, commissioners, I will note you will get a second shot at 11.7.2 in the item below. So I would say the key question here is, do we want to tackle this 24 air mile question as part of the comp plan? Our recommendation as staff would be no. And then if you wanted to dig into the specific language in 11.7.2, you could do that here, or you could do it in the next item, either one.
Alrighty, does anyone have a recommendation for option A on item 13?
I don't think it's appropriate.
I concur.
Yeah, I'm not asking for any language changes.
We will stick with what you folks have. Alrighty, item 14, should policy language related to water availability and destination resort siting be amended? And again, we have 11.7.2, and then policy 513, consider potential impacts on water quality and availability in surrounding areas as part of the siting, planning, and approval processes for destination resorts and other large-scale developments. And that's currently what we have in our comp plan.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would just point out that this is under the purview of the Water Resources Department, who would weigh in on such an application. And in fact, it's already addressed, because part of the destination resort application requires a hydrology report, and all of this is, like I say, is not under the county's purview.
Anyone else?
That makes sense to me with the second option here listed. Like, seems like kind of what we already do. I know that may be slightly different in the wording, but are we, so I guess this is a clarification question, but in terms of specifically, like, okay, just take me as an example. I'm not really only focused on myself. But me as an example, living on RR10 just north of Eagle Crest. So, like, you know, which is just north of Thornburg. Let's say Thornburg develops as planned, and then my well runs dry, not because we're running out of water in the aquifer, because we all know there's plenty of water in the aquifer, but just because my well just wasn't dug deep enough for a little bit more straws in the ground. So I think the problem with that is, even if all of the water is replaced as planned with Thornburg, like, somebody like me still has to spend a whole bunch of money to drill a new well, and it's so expensive around here because of all the rocks. So what do we do for people like that? I know I'm not the only one, which is why I bring myself up as an example. Like, how do we help those people?
I guess, Vice Chair, curious, one is I don't think you'll be, I think it's highly unlikely that if Thornburg gets developed, there'll be a direct causality to show that Thornburg's use of their water consumption is explicitly tied to your domestic well. Your domestic well is not a water right. You're exempt. And so there are a multitude of factors, climate, the piping of canals that are contributing to the reduction in the water table, but to many people are trying to correlate the decline in the aquifer. Thornburg isn't even built yet.
Just talking about Thornburg.
There-
reduces
it's
the groundwater.
significantly litigated, and yet people's wells are declining. The one thing that I would remind the Planning Commission, and I wouldn't expect you to remember this, but Deschutes County's destination resort requirements, and Stephanie's here too, so she could certainly supplement my remarks. It requires a resort to demonstrate no net loss of wildlife habitat, including impacts to fisheries. And so one of the reasons why Thornburg has been mired in litigation is you have dedicated opponents that have for over 15 years been scrutinizing whether or not they've met that standard. And so to Commissioner Cyrus's point, there are the Water Resources Department is the agency that's going to determine whether or not the consumptive use of a resort is appropriately mitigated. And we have groundwater mitigation rules. Additionally, to the extent there's another destination resort, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife is going to, articulate what it means to have no net loss for a new resort and its implications to wildlife resources. So when we think of, creating and implementing additional limitations, I think an argument can be made that Deschutes County's regulations are very rigorous and go above state law. And whether or not Thornburg is an example of that rigor, I don't want to get into that debate, but that's been a sticking point for some time. And I'm not sure. I would make the argument that the rules and regulations and the case law that's come out of Thornburg further demonstrate that the laws that are on the books today for a new resort are incredibly rigorous.
So it's kind of like the bar is already extremely high anyway.
That's my perspective. Steffi, I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
No.
That's certainly my standpoint from what I've seen with Thornburg's experience, and even with Caldera Springs, which settled on wildlife related issues with Central Oregon Land Watch. So I think I find that our code it's not perfect as demonstrated by Thornburg's experience, but the burden that is placed on the applicant is extensive.
Madam Chair.
No net loss is an extremely high bar, and lots of consultants and attorneys are being paid lots of money to debate what no net loss looks like and how it's measured and how it's determined. So I don't know if you'd like additional comment, but I think Peter captured it well. Just because an area is mapped as for destination resort, that's such, one could not even begin to assume that they'd be able to, get all the way through the multiple layers of permitting processes and reviews that are required to get to the point where you've got an open and functioning resort, let alone the impact on wildlife, particularly fisheries. That's the main issue that Thornburg's still litigating right now.
Commissioner Cyrus?
Yeah, sorry about that. I would second that. Quite frankly, the current bar is, Olympic height. The amount of studies. I've actually had the misfortune maybe of reading Thornburg's original application, and it was 1,500 pages long. The amount of studies from an archaeologic, hydraulic, you have to address agricultural impacts, transportation impacts, forest impacts. I mean, there isn't hardly any stone unturned in doing a resort application. And I'm not quite sure, quite frankly, how you would come up with any, how you're going to raise the bar anymore to make it any more difficult to get an approval. So I hate to see the county going down this direction of looking for more limitations, because anything you add, then any landowner could simply come back and say, well, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. We'd like the county to pay for the resort now, or pay for the loss of making it no longer feasible to move forward. And so I think it's a dangerous language to add to the comp plan to call for additional limitations, because then it could potentially put a financial liability on the county.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Then in that case, I think it's fine as written. I don't know yet what other people think, but I am just so I think it's a really good point. I'm against, in general, aside from the legal element of it, I'm just against having so many regulations on anything that it then makes it impossible to, like just what we had with the marijuana issue too. It's just sort of like, if you regulate this to the level that like you can't actually do it, then that's actually changing the law without changing the law, and that just actually seems pretty icky. So yeah, thanks for the context, everyone.
Commissioner Lotman?
Thank you, Chair. I'm inclined to agree that we don't need to have any additional language. And I also just want to point out that, to Commissioner Cyrus's point, and Peter as well, and Nicole probably also, that it's an OWRD issue. And I know we're going to talk about COID's proposed text changes. And there is some discussion about that. What is the purview of the county and what is the purview of OWRD? It's not, very extensive, but it is another area that points out, we can all partner together, but ultimately water rights is an OWRD issue, not a county issue.
And would you agree to no changes in the current language?
I guess the question is the current proposal to leave the language in 11.7.2 that calls for implementing additional limitations? Is that the proposed language?
Yes.
Because I would propose deleting that, because I think that's the dangerous part that we shouldn't be adding to it, is calling for additional requirements that are going to put a liability on the county.
So briefly, you are okay with the existing policy 513?
Well, I would suggest deleting that one also, because that's already covered by the existing resort application language.
So this leads to further discussion, or?
I think I'm just confused about 11.7.2, because it says going above and beyond current state regulations. So despite all the discussion and being convinced that maybe we don't need to further regulate, add additional things, I'm still sort of confused about what that actually means.
It's one more of those belt and suspenders things, I think. I would say create and implement additional limitations would already be going beyond state law, because a lot of our requirements come from state law. So I would say if you wanted to keep 11.7.2, we could just delete beyond current state regulations, and it would essentially be getting at, does the Planning Commission want to state as, a value creating and implementing potentially additional requirements on destination resorts?
I guess it depends on what.
So your thought, Stephanie, would, sorry, Nicole, create and implement additional limitations on the siting and development of destination resorts to ensure protection of water quality, recreational resources, and other county resources and values.
And in other terms, explore could be another term there. Again, this was attempted to be a middle ground at reflecting back community concerns about some of the impacts with destination resorts that folks felt remain even within our current regulations while still acknowledging that other community members feel, hey, we already have enough requirements. So again, I think explore could be another word to use there to maybe better reflect that balancing.
I feel like explore would be better than create, because I mean, with listing these out, water quality, recreation resources, other kind of resources, values, like that does help a little bit with, like with what Commissioner Cyrus is saying. If things aren't actually being threatened because the bar is already so high, then there would be no reason to restrict anything further. But if there was something that was, like I don't know, like something that wasn't covered, I suppose that helps to list those out there.
Chair and Vice Chair, what I think you're faced with here is, there is a segment of the community that is really concerned about what destination resorts represent in the community, a new destination resort. And what policy 11.7.2 and 5.1.3 are trying to do is add additional regulatory requirements above what we just summarized to make it that much more difficult to cite a destination resort. And so the question for the Planning Commission is, we could wordsmith this to explore it, but the question is, ultimately, do you find that I think that the existing regulations that are in place today are sufficient if you believe that it warrants revisitation, then you could. That's what I think 11.7.2 and 5.1.3 are getting at. So it's really, this is one of those, our community, there are many members of the community see destination resorts as an existential threat, even though Thornburg is not built today. Thornburg has been litigated since 2005, but it's what it symbolizes in relationship to Deschutes County and resiliency and vulnerability, the full gamut. So that's the central question. And, you don't have to answer it now, but, as your practitioners have experienced, and I include Stephanie in this, our destination resort program as exhibited by Thornburg Resort is incredibly, and by the comments that Commissioner Cyrus has acknowledged, in terms of what Thornburg has had to produce to demonstrate that it's compliant, not just with state law, but with our local criteria, is incredibly rigorous. So if you want to explore the programmatic elements, then you could just say that and not get into ensure protection of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, because those are all part and parcel of the criteria that go into demonstrating a destination resort is compatible with local code and conditional use criteria that deal with compatibility.
And I Commissioners, if I may, I just wanted to note again, the way that the language, if you were to change 11.72 to explore, which I do feel is more fitting there, I do want to clarify that it wouldn't create those regulations, again, because it's a high level policy, but it's continuing that conversation. If you were to remove those policies, it's not to say that someone couldn't bring this up again, but I think it's whether or not, post the text amendment that ultimately was denied, do you want to keep this topic open of whether or not additional requirements should be added? And if yes, then you would add, these policies. And if no, you feel like this is already vetted, then that would be removal
Madam
of the
Chair.
policies.
Yes.
I would again point out that the comp plan is the foundation by which everything else builds. And so if the comp plan calls for additional limitations and restrictions, then everything moving forward that builds on top of that has to match this comp plan. And so, and that's all I would point out, that what it's doing is creating a box that then the county and us moving forward are obligated to create additional barriers that, as was pointed out, Thornburg's been working on this for 19 years. That's a fairly high bar to meet. And now you're going to say, you just as well just take the whole resort language out of the plan and just say, no more, we're done. In which case, then the county can start writing checks.
So the one thing that I remember is all the public hearings we had, the majority of people voiced a significant opinion. Most of them one way, a good bit of them another way. And the existing language was drafted as a middle ground approach to promote further community conversation. I'm fine with explore and then a period after resorts.
If I may, I'm sorry. I was, the other thing that came up during the destination was our text amendments, just to kind of change the angle of this topic is there was testimony articulating the importance of having a conversation about having a conversation about what destination resorts represent and mean for the community. And so it's what I'm trying to articulate is that I think that there could be a general interest in having a conversation about what the destination resorts have and the resort communities have offered for Deschutes County, and have a conversation about what that represents, and you could quantify that, as well as engaging as part of a community conversation, what the concerns are from the residents of what resorts are, how resorts and maybe their expansions, Caldera is expanding, about what the concerns are about what that represents, and then talking about that just holistically about what it means for Deschutes County to think about future resorts. So that's the community conversation that I think is, if you wanted to explore community conversations, that's what I would offer for your consideration is, there's pros and strong negative opinions about what resorts represent. And those should be discussed in an open environment. And then that may lead to something else, but it's not for us or for the Planning Commission at this point to determine what that is. But if you want to promote a conversation, you might consider, I don't know if I'm being concise, but that's what I think you could try to capture to continue a dialogue with those that are strongly invested in this topic.
Commissioner Kelly?
I'm learning a ton, and I appreciate all the this really like thoughtful conversations around destination resort, because it is very emotional, I think. And one thing that I've noticed, like, I've been traveling and I'll be, oh, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Bend. They'd be like, oh, is that near Sun River? I've been to Sun River as a kid, so it is very much an identifying part of our community, and it's served our community really well and helped us grow. And, so yes, 100% yes. I do, though, want to represent a huge part of the population that says, no. Yeah, we get it, but we want it to be thoughtful. We want it to be and it sounds like the bar is already very high. What I would propose is to maybe just eliminate the first half of 11.7.2 and write something like ensure protection of water quality, period. Where let's just keep that as the future aspirations of what destination resorts will look to protect our natural resources.
Madam,
Commissioner
Yeah.
Altman?
I was just going to agree, and I think that with Chair and also Commissioner Kelly, that it's important to somehow acknowledge and embrace both sides. And I don't want to discount the people who gave so much of their time and energy and effort to give their testimony on how they feel about it. And if you agree or you disagree, that's okay. But I think to just dismiss it all together, like, thanks, but no thanks, we don't really want to hear from you anymore, is not good. So whatever language we come up with to add or take away, I think that we really need to acknowledge that this is a very big issue for the county. People are very passionate about it, and there's always room for conversation. So that's my comment.
Vice Chair?
Yeah, so I think I would be most comfortable with the language in general being more toward a little bit more balanced. So right now, as it stands, the language that's in there is about going above and beyond current state regulations and adding more potential regulations. But it'd be nice if that were like, if our goal really is to continue the community conversation, it'd be nice if it was something like continue the community conversation and explore ideas such as additional regulations or better understanding of why your well is running dry. I mean, I'm joking a little bit, but actually, I think there are some misunderstandings and there is misinformation floating around out there about some of the things that we're really concerned about, like having to drill a new well or what's happening with groundwater or what's happening with wildlife. And it would be really nice, I think, for everyone to have a good understanding of what do we know so far as, just even things before being on this commission, I didn't even know that municipal water uses were like a small, tiny fraction of overall water uses. So I saw people watering the lawns or golf courses, whatever, and I was like, oh, they're using up all the water. But it turns out, like being around here, I've learned that that's actually not how that works. So there could be lots of things like that people are really against destination resorts because of things that actually aren't actually true. So continuing the community conversation could end up being like, hey, we just need this one law. We could get rid of like 5 of these rules, but like just have this one rule and it would make it better for everyone. Or so it wouldn't be additional limitations, it would actually be fewer limitations, but it would meet everyone's needs. Or maybe people just listen to each other and learn some things that they didn't know, learn about the context, and they're like, okay, actually, I'm kind of psyched to have a new destination resort. But I think that the plan here should reflect the goal of continuing this conversation and making sure that people's concerns are adequately addressed, rather than saying like, we're going to address them with this set of policies or that set of policies.
Madam Chair.
Mhm.
It's slightly off topic, but in the past, the commission has brought in experts on different fields and just had an agenda whereby there was more of a roundtable discussion of educational things, for example, water issues or agricultural issues or something. This might be actually a good topic to have at another date. Put on the agenda and bring some folks in from some resorts and things and get some facts and figures, the assessor and the EDCO and as well as the folks that are opposed to some of the stuff and water resources. And, unfortunately, there's a huge amount of misinformation going around. I mean, for example, water use. I mean, I actually ran the calculations myself, comparing a destination resort built to its maximum capacity versus an irrigated hayfield. And I think I came up with numbers equal. The destination resort would use about 1/3 as much water as a hayfield.
Mhm.
And so, they're not a huge use of water. Densities are such that it's 1.5 units per acre, whereas a city lot is 10 per acre or more. No net loss of wildlife, 50% open space. I mean, some would argue that maybe this is the ideal type of rural development that should actually be required of all rural development, of those kind of benefits, versus what you're seeing in other subdivisions that have almost no restrictions. And so I this may be something that the commission might have an interest in doing more of a fact finding and get through the details on some of this stuff.
Like a destination resort panel, like we had the
Yeah.
farm panel and the water panel. Maybe we could have a destination resort roundtable panel, community involvement that could go in the parking lot.
So anyhow, just throw that as kind of a side topic, because there is a lot of misinformation and a lot of question, and certainly a lot of education that could stand to be done that happened 30 years ago when the county was originally deciding that this was a good thing for the county. It might be time to revisit some of that.
I like that idea. I think we would all learn a lot. Back to 11.7.2. Do we want to say something like explore the siting and development of destination resorts to ensure protection of water quality, or do we want to just say ensure protection of water quality, I feel we need to have something in because of all the community input that we've had, the people that have shown up, like Commissioner Altman said, I don't want to just like sweep this under the table. And I think I feel something needs to be 11.7.2.
I think Commissioner Kelly had some language that sounded pretty good as far as just ensuring the protection of these things.
And I'm fine with that too. I don't need to explore the siting and development to ensure, but we need to have something.
Which I think covers the 10,000 foot level.
Mhm.
That's the point, is to ensure the protections, which is great. But it also recognizes the fact that a lot of the stuff that's already currently in code covers that and wouldn't allow the code to be relaxed more because we're ensuring these protections.
Peter?
Thanks, Chair Williams. Just to build on Commissioner, I'm just trying to orient you to the destination resort policies. So policy 11.7.4 speaks to the mapping process, the criteria for eligibility. Policy 11.7.5, which is a carryover. I'm looking at Nicole. It's the ordinance provisions, A through E. I'm going to go to C. This is carryover code. We've had this in our code for over a decade. The county may adopt additional land use restrictions to ensure that proposed destination resorts are compatible with the environmental capabilities of the site and the surrounding land uses. I offer that as Commissioner Syverson. I think if you look at the goals and the policies that have been carried over, I think it speaks to 11.7.2 and to 5.1.3. But I'll give you a moment to kind of revisit those ordinance provisions, but those ordinance provisions provide the leverage, which is what informs our current destination resort code in 18, I think it's 18.113 or 116. So that language seems to get at what 11.7.2 is asking.
I just had a thought. It was like, I think I like hearing this environment capability. Like, I think of this document as just like a living, breathing document to carry us into the future, because we don't know necessarily what the future is going to entail. And I think that's like some of the controversy with Thornburg is what was, approved in a certain time frame may not be what our reality is now. And we don't really know what that reality is going to be in 20, 40 years. But this document's still going to be around to hopefully carry on these values.
So, Madam
So-
Chair. All right. Oh, go ahead.
I had a question for Peter. Can the adopted additional land use restrictions, can these be resort specific?
This is resort specific.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify that.
Pertains to destination resorts explicitly.
Oh, I meant the additional land use restrictions. Can it like individual resorts? Like, we're going to put these additional restrictions on this resort because it's here, but we're not going to put these additional land use restrictions on this resort over here because of topography,
Apply under C. Could we apply additional requirements for one resort and not another? Is, I believe, the question.
I think that's going to be on a case by case basis.
So that would be yes then.
So, Madam Chair, I would second what Peter's saying is, if you look at all of the different goals, goal 11 under resorts has more detail and is more in the weeds and is at the 500 foot level instead of 10,000 foot level on so much of it that it covers far more detail than any other goal. And quite frankly, if we were to bring goal 11 in compliance with or make it match the rest of the goals in this county, we would take out 80% of the language that's already in goal 11 because it has gotten right down to the details. My comp plan book
does not have goal 11. It just says goals and policies.
Goal 11.7, I believe, is what Commissioner Cyrus, and 11.6 as well speaks to this.
Okay.
keep turning. You're getting closer.
Oh,
So anyhow, I
Yeah.
guess what I'm getting at is the details are already there, and the 1172 is redundant of what's already in other places that's already in print and unnecessary.
I agree.
Vice Chair?
Um, I mean,
They're making arguments
I'm
to.
following.
Yeah.
I'm following, but we're talking about like 3 or 4 different ideas at the same time, so I don't know. I mean, I've kind of already said what I was hoping for with
Yeah.
the policy, but there's a few other ideas on the table. So I think we just need to decide which idea we're deciding about, and then we can move forward. And
Yeah.
Commissioner, if I may,
Yes.
could pose the question. So to summarize a couple of the options here, I've heard from commissioners that 1172 and perhaps 513 are already handled in the comprehensive plan, so we could remove those. A second idea to reflect the input that we did hear through this process would be to add a policy, or it could be an action item, depending on how we phrase it, which is to hold community conversations discussing destination resorts, period, and just leave it at that. I'm curious if the commission has thoughts on, that as a package of moving forward with that, or if you'd prefer, again, to just remove 1172 and 513, or, add that community conversation policy.
Commissioner Kelly?
I don't know if I'm comfortable removing those, though. That's not what, I don't think I'm comfortable with removing them. I'm comfortable with, condensing, and we spoke about ensuring the protection, but I do like the fact that it's listed, because I don't mind, even if it is redundant, I don't mind that. So I would support not removing them.
So a third option is Commissioner Kelly's proposal, the language she proposed earlier, or combining what you just said about community conversations with what Commissioner Kelly recommended, which is what I would prefer. As sort of consistent with what I mentioned earlier. So I'm still feeling the same way.
Chair?
Yes.
Are you done?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thanks.
I actually agree with Commissioner Karas about adding, I think this is what you're saying also, adding language about having community conversations about destination resorts and taking into consideration Commissioner Kelly's proposed language. I'm just going to say if I could just add a little bit to it. For 1172, to ensure protection of water quality, recreational resources, and other county resources and values in the development of destination resorts by holding community conversations or something like that. So it's a little bit of duplicate language from what Peter referenced, but it says that it talks about the values and also that we value having community involvement as a policy.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I know we've been on this topic quite a while, but I would also point out that once an application submit and it's 1,500, if probably now 2,000 pages long, is submitted, then there's a hearings process. And there was some discussion about whether certain restrictions could be resort specific. And that's the process at which restrictions and criteria become resort specific based on the application that's submitted, and then the public comment, then the public hearing, and then the commission response and hearing, and then LUBA and all the, like I say, I think Thornburg's is up in the 70s so far as number of appeals. But there is extensive public discussion once an application is submitted, and who knows, when the next time an application is going to be submitted in this county. Even we may be 4 iterations of a comp plan down the road before the next one is even discussed. I guess I'm not seeing the benefit of having community discussions when there's nothing on the table to discuss other than theories.
We talked about having like a resort destination panel come and talk to us. So I think that could kind of be covered with community discussion. The public can come, they can ask questions, get better answers.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that, I guess my anticipation was a panel discussion, which I've seen and actually participated in the past, was the panel and the planning commission. The public was certainly not invited to participate in that process, which would create, in my opinion, a huge circus. Because then you lose the ability to have a discussion with the panel.
Should we vote on the proposal?
What I would like to do is 11.7.2 only, as Commissioner Kelly and Commissioner Altman kind of combined an idea, a thought. I would like to just take a vote on 11.7.2. And if you could repeat that back to us, Nicole?
Try my best. All right, so then that language would be 11.7.2, ensure protection of water quality, recreational resources, and other county resources and values in the development of destination resorts by holding community conversations. I think we can continue to massage that a bit by promoting community conversations and promoting community conversations, something like that.
I'm not sure how you ensure. I'm not sure how you ensure water, all of those will be protected through community conversation.
I would eliminate the community conversation. Because does that make sense? We can ensure water quality in the that's what we want to do in the development of the destination resorts, period.
Commissioners, if I may, I apologize. I think I kind of butchered that. So it would be ensure blah, blah, blah in the development of destination resorts.
Period.
Or comma, and hold community conversations, I think was kind of the intent of Commissioner Altman's piece. So it was, ensure, maybe it is two separate policies just to clean it up that way.
I'm okay with two separate policies or all in one policy or whatever words you want to use that reflect that intention. But I actually think it's important that we have I know we have our whole citizen involvement goal, but I actually think it's important to put something about continuing this conversation as part of our plan, because we're not done with this topic. Like people are really upset about this. This is like, when you go on social media, this is like one of maybe two extremely hot topics that people are just, their brains are exploding. And we're the citizen involvement committee. So I think it's okay if we say that we want to have a citizen sort of community conversation or ongoing discussion about this in some way. And I don't care how it's worded, but if the vote is about just that wording without the community conversation, I'm probably going to vote no. That's okay with me. But that's kind of where I feel strongly enough about it.
And I am absolutely for community involvement and discussion 100%. 100%, but I think that needs, like, we need to separately have community discussions about destination resorts and also ensure protection of water quality, blah, 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 in the development of destination resorts. I see them as two different policy numbers. That's how I see it.
It's fine with me too. Yeah. As I mentioned, I don't have a strong preference for one policy or two policies, but I just think if we're going to vote on something, we should just be clear what we're voting on.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yep.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. These are two completely separate ones. And I also believe strongly that the discussion of further community involvement and discussion on this is not appropriate in this goal, because that's goal one. Goal one is extensive about community involvement and participation in everything we do. And
Could it separately be added to goal one?
That shouldn't even be in this goal, because that's not addressing the values, et cetera, pro, con, et cetera, of a destination resort. That's goal one. That's already covered.
Commissioners, I might suggest
Yes.
a vote on this item. And again, I just wanted to remind the group that we will certainly provide, a recap of diversity of opinions, et cetera. But I think a vote might be helpful to get direction from staff and then to be able to
You bet.
discuss some of the other.
So this is only for 11.7.2, ensure protection of water quality, recreational resources and other county resources and values in the development of destination resources. And an additional policy number, community conversations about destination resorts. Or community involvement, conversations, education, I don't know.
I think those need to be two separate discussions.
2 votes.
Okay, 2 votes. 11.7.2, as we've changed language, ensure protection of water quality, recreational resources and other county resources and values in the development of destination resorts. Commissioner Altman,
Yes.
Vice Chair,
Yes.
Kelly, Cyrus,
Yeah, I support it.
alrighty, 5 in favor of 11.7.2. And new policy to have community conversations and education or outreach regarding new destination resorts or destination resorts in general.
Oh, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I would just like to reiterate that this would add an additional directive to staff
Mhm.
and us and add on to our calendar to hold these things, although it's undefined, and that I think it's well covered under goal 1 already.
Peter?
You're asking for my perspective?
Yes.
I think to the extent you want to have a community conversation, I think it's going to warrant it can't be open. I think you're going to run into problems if it's open-ended because I would strongly discourage having a community conversation about Thornburg when Thornburg is still an active application, in various stages of litigation, not to mention, I think, potential new applications as they refined their development expectations. So if you want a community conversation, the community conversation, you might want to think about, to discuss the economic benefits as well as the community concerns that relate to A, B, C, D, and E. I do think that there hasn't been a conversation in quite some time to talk about the quantified economic development benefits that have happened for decades. And then, at the same time, you could allow for those that, from agencies, for example, that are mindful of the water resource limitations that exist on our basin and what that means for a future resort or how it relates to the groundwater mitigation rules that are presently being up for reconsideration. I don't know what you're looking for, but I think it's going to need that kind of context, because if it's just open-ended, I'm not sure who we would invite to provide significant context that would warrant that robust community conversations. Eagle Crest has been in place since 1992 with several phases. Tetherow has been in place, it got its entitlement in 2004. It's on a centralized water and sewer system. Pronghorn has been in place got its entitlement in 2004. It's on Avion water, and it sends its sewer to Bend wastewater treatment plant. So, to me, it feels like, I'll stop there because I find myself inserting myself, but I think you're going to need to define what you want from that conversation and what you want people to walk away with.
Madam Chair, if I may, I just
Yes.
wanted to offer another option for the group to consider. We will have an action plan that we will be developing. So if there were concern about this being a goal, a policy, I just wanted to note that you do have that option of putting it in the quote parking lot where it will be recorded. We will present that to the board, but it could be, in an action plan, which doesn't hold, the same weight, I would say, as the comp plan. But again, reflects that desire or community perspective. So just another option to consider.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So when I originally raised the idea, I did suggest that it go in the parking lot. I think that in terms of the intention, it had more to do with, as Peter said, keeping the conversation going, which I think the policy we just voted on does. It like kind of leaves the door open in a number of ways, but I think my hope would be that if it were in the parking lot and did get addressed as an action item, that it would be something like, hey, like people have significant concerns about this. We could benefit from having some sort of roundtable or community discussion that brainstorms or like this whole comprehensive plan process has been healthy for the community to get involved and to share their opinions and share their concerns. So it would be nice if we don't have to wait until another 20 years to have the conversation again, just because I think it's good for people to think about these things and learn about these things. So I just think that whether it's a policy or goes into the parking lot as I sort of like originally envisioned, then I just think it's really important that it happen. But you know, Commissioner Cyrus brought up a really good point. We don't want to, I wouldn't want to recommend that you phrase it in a way that mandates us into having to do something, but something like explore or look for opportunities for community discussions about exactly what 11.7.2 actually looks like would be great. And I totally will back off and let that be in the parking lot. That's totally fine with me if that's what other people want. But
I'm fine with the parking lot.
Madam Chair, I completely agree. I mean, I think the discussion certainly should be had. It's been a long time. It's been since the 90s since we really discussed resorts. It's a good time to have a discussion, but I don't think it belongs in the comp plan.
Everyone in favor of the parking lot?
Yes, I support Commissioner Cure.
All right. 5 cars in the parking lot.
woohoo, we can move on.
Okay, actually, we can't. We have policy 513 still.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yep.
And Commissioner Altman,
I was gonna ask for a break, but.
yep. 5-minute break.
I mean, if you want to finish.
Yeah.
513 and get
Okay, let's do the 513, then we'll take a break because if everyone's up for it, I think we can possibly burn through this tonight.
let's do the 513 and then
Yeah, 513.
Support leaving 513 on the table
Or in the policy.
in the policy, not in the parking lot.
Yes. And
I like it the
I
way
know you're for removal, Commissioner Cyrus.
I personally think it doesn't belong here, and it's already being addressed as part of the reports and everything else, and it's not the purview. It's purview of the Water Resources Department, not the county.
Any
I
thoughts?
would leave it the way it is. It's my opinion.
And Commissioner Altman?
I'm torn because, I'm very tired. I like I can't think of a word, like the energy or idea behind it, but I also agree with Commissioner Cyrus that I think that's not the county's decision. I think it's OWRD's decision. So I'm. Other than that.
I think it's usurping Water Resource Department authority by making decisions based on water issues that aren't within the county's statutory authority to deal with.
There are a number of items in chapter 11 that address things like this. If I can get back to. Okay, so Commissioner Cyrus, are you for leaving 513 in?
No,
Commissioner Kelly,
Yes.
Commissioner, Vice Chair Curis,
Yes, leaving it in.
Commissioner Altman,
I'm gonna say no.
And I will also say no, so we'll say 3 no's, 2 yays for keeping it in, and also that there was a very extensive discussion about this with a lot of oscillating. All right, 5-minute break
And educating.
and educating.
So last week, we
Do I say like meeting back in session or anything like that? Or do we just start talking?
you can say whatever you want.
The gavel too.
Yeah, beat that stick.
Yes. Screen. All righty, we're back in order. Item number 15. Should narrative text be amended to recognize destination resorts as a key recreational strategy of the county? Staff does note there is a reference to destination resorts in the tourism chapter 9. Any thoughts? Do we want to add something to the narrative in chapter 11 on resort destinations as recreational strategy?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
just to tee this up. So Commissioner Cyrus actually brought this up earlier this evening, which is a good tie into this. So we got a few public comments that noted that essentially a desire for more narrative about the value of destination resorts, some of the history, some of the economic benefit. Staff does not have any concerns with adding that. Similar to the economic development item we discussed, we think it's appropriate. So we'd recommend you direct staff to add some additional context.
Yeah,
Everyone?
Support that.
I originally was like, that's fine. We don't really need that. But now after learning what I've learned from Commissioner Cyrus tonight, I'm like, yeah, we probably do need to get some.
And that was just what I noted in reading through the narrative is it had a real short discussion about the fact there's community opposition, but it really doesn't go into what destination resorts are and what they contribute, and be it recreation or housing or open space, or not really a descriptive of what a resort is and what that is in the community. All the reasons it became part of goal 11.
I'd really like to see something like why did they put this in the state law in the first place? Like why? Yeah, exactly what he's saying. But I've always wondered that, and it's never actually thought to ask. But
Happy
yeah.
to explain that.
yeah, and we can totally nerd out on that too.
Later.
Yeah.
But yeah, not too.
Yeah, or yeah, anytime. But no, it would be great to have just a little blurb in there about that.
Commissioner Altman?
Yes, I agree.
All righty, put it in. 16, should policy language relating to renewable energy be amended to consider adverse impacts to natural resources?
And Madam Chair and Commissioners, so quite a few of these policies are carried over from our existing comprehensive plan. Many of them are quite supportive of renewable energy at the small scale and larger scale, while still being cognizant of natural environment and kind of balancing some of those concerns with impacts to the environment. In the public record for this process during the hearing, there are some folks who wanted us to go further and more so support renewable energy, and some who expressed general concern about wildlife and natural resource impacts. We feel that, again, the language is already kind of balancing those two things appropriately. So we recommend you retain the current language as drafted, but have provided an additional new policy that makes it more explicit about, balancing adverse impacts during renewable siting processes if you were desiring something that balanced these a bit more.
And would that be the applicant's responsibility and cost?
Correct. Yes.
Any thoughts?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, in just a quick skim of these, it's got lots of encourage, promote, incentivize, yada, yada, yada. But I really don't see a whole lot of the balancing with regard to evaluating the adverse impacts.
I mean, it's in there. It says like, oh, sorry. Madam Chair,
Chair.
there's some of that in there. It's just not the sentences all start with, like you have, while mitigating impacts on neighboring properties and the natural environment, consistent with adopted county financing programs, mitigating impacts on the community net. They just put it in the second half of each one. You're right. All of them start with the encourage, but then land on the other side of the scale. Not all of them, but
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Altman?
I would be in favor in just adding language to where it says and the natural environment, and also add wildlife.
In the option A or over here as a new policy?
Just as they're already written. So 14.1.5, mitigating impacts on neighboring properties, the natural environment and wildlife. 14.1.8, same.
Is wildlife natural environment, or is natural environment plant, soil, water?
So environment is pretty broad. If you wanted to call it wildlife specifically, you could. It's up to the commission.
I would support that. I would support adding wildlife.
yeah. Sounds good.
All righty. Any other comment?
So would that offset 14.110? or would put sideboards on that one or not.
Development of site.
It seems more like a super sighting one.
So I believe, and I might call on Peter for this one too. Again, this comes from our existing comprehensive plan. So under our state land use goals, this is one of the allowances to counties is that you could identify, protect, and support renewable energy sites, I believe through, creation of ECs, et cetera. We don't currently have that. So that's, I believe, again, a carryover, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. If I may, Madam Chair, I think there is some rulemaking that's happening that speaks. So this policy, I think, is taking advantage of that possibility. And there is legislative rulemaking that is going to apply to east of the Cascades. For our county, I don't see it being all that applicable because our land base is so heavily parcelized. But as you go further east, where it gets much more rural, the goal is to identify sites that could accommodate a significant renewable energy project while taking into consideration and balancing the trade-offs for cultural resources and wildlife resources. So the goal is to try to identify those Goldilocks locations where the state, which is trying to meet its renewable energy portfolio within the state, at the same time recognize that there are other competing values that are just as important that pertain to cultural resources, wildlife resources, and other community values. So that rulemaking is in its infancy. I think it ties back into the policy 14.1.10, which is, again, acknowledging that may be an opportunity, but it's not predetermining what that outcome is. And it's been a carryover policy, I would likely guess, for decades.
Would it be worth like listing whatever Oregon statute, like identify, protect, per Oregon?
You could say consistent with, applicable Oregon statutes, administrative rules, if you wanted to.
Just so we know that it's like that's something the state has out there.
I think that's a good question, Commissioner. I think we could, I don't know if it really directly, if we want to tie it to a statute or rule, but we could say, within the permissions allowed by statewide goal 10.
Goal 13.
13, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, goal 14, 13.
kind of back to the discussion of, the belt and the suspenders. I mean, the proposal on this is to include evaluation of adverse impacts to natural resources as part of the renewable energy siting processes. So I don't really see this as contrary to anything else. It just kind of ties it all in because most all of these say, provide, encourage, promote, and this just kind of a catch-all at the end saying, by the way, don't forget.
Yeah.
And so I think it makes sense to add this in here as just because, these sites are not environmentally friendly. The BLM is currently trying to identify 250,000 acres of solar site in the western states. They had a hearing in Bend last year that I went to, and their goal is to put in 250,000 acres of solar panels. And so the environmental impacts of just what they're proposing on BLM lands is crazy. And I just think that the county ought to at least consider some of the environmental impacts when we take a look at these sites.
I'm sure it does occur. I'm fine either way. I'm sure that the evaluation does occur, but if we want it in writing, I'm fine.
I support that.
Any thought?
I'm pretty neutral, but I could also support it.
That's how I feel too. So put me down as a support.
Alrighty, put it in.
So what is it?
Option A in the matrix. So it's include evaluation of adverse impacts to natural resources as part of renewable energy siting
Great,
processes.
thank you.
Simple innocuous.
17, should verbiage throughout the plan be strengthened to avoid loopholes or misinterpretations?
No.
I agree.
Agreed.
All righty.
Sorry. Just
I had a no on mine. Commissioner Altman?
I'm ambivalent. I support.
Okay. Nope.
I feel like that's where like the next level of policy,
Yeah.
zoning code and comes into place.
18, should narrative in chapter 5 be amended to include COID October 25 and November 30 comments related to irrigation canal piping? And I think you'll tee this one up.
So as I said earlier, commissioners, we received this and I'm specifically pointing to the 1130 COID letter that I placed on the dais. I didn't have enough copies for everyone. So you'll share. But essentially there were just a couple that we wanted to tee up to get planning commission feedback on. So this one pertains to a section of narrative in our water resources section. And it essentially talks about decline of water levels. And initially in this, we, note essentially just some, seepage from irrigation canals as potentially exacerbating this issue. COID wrote some additional text noting, the benefits of canal piping being, the reversing of evaporation essentially from from open canals rather. So they're proposing some language. We're comfortable with most of the language, but we want to be able to continue to refine this during the hearing process.
So can we go through that specifically on which ones you're talking about?
Yeah, so it's in the letter. Starts on page 3 and I've highlighted it on there. So it's water resources page 5.3 and you'll see it starts the high desert climate of Central Oregon. So I'll give you all a moment to read that. And while you're reading that, I just wanted to note, so again, we'd prefer just some, the direction from the Planning Commission to continue to massage this language rather than adopting it verbatim. And then we also provided, Central Oregon Land Watch provided some specific language on this as well, that we just thought we would tee up as well.
So having read this earlier, I just want to say I support it. I don't really have any further items of discussion about it, but
I support it as well.
I read it earlier and like Nicole said at the bottom here, I'm in favor of editing, but also include information on potential community member concerns regarding impacts to a water availability from loss of water seepage. So kind of taking COID and COLWs and so that's the bottom carrot here of what the bottom paragraph of the staff recommendations is what I'm for.
I also agree with staff recommendations.
So you're addressing, I assume, the yellow highlighted section.
Correct.
I would suggest not deleting the portion that talks about the piping exacerbating the issue, because that is a fact. I don't have a problem with adding the other language talking about the benefits, but I certainly wouldn't sugarcoat the fact that that is impacting well levels.
And that was part of the down here portion on the matrix. This bottom
Yes, Commissioner, you highlighted exactly what staff was referring to, which is we're comfortable with most of the language, but that specific deletion regarding seepage, we would like to keep. So we just want to continue to kind of massage that language.
Okay.
yeah.
all in favor?
I
Aye.
Good with that.
All righty. 19, should narrative in chapter 5 be amended to include COID October 25, November 30 comments related to the stability of the Deschutes River?
So commissioners, this is on the same page that we were just on. It's page 4 in your letter. So it's just under lava sponge a little bit farther down the page. And it just essentially one sentence really is kind of what we're getting at. So there is some context to it. But COID is proposing to add a sentence noting it is for these reasons that the Deschutes River is one of the most stable rivers in the Western United States. Staff just had some concerns about incorporating that verbatim just because we didn't have any additional items in the record. And the term stable, we weren't sure exactly what that meant. So again, just wanted the time during the board's hearing process to get additional information from COID on, kind of what the stable designation means and to be able to provide some more context.
I can actually address that. Back in college, there was a professor at COCC in geography that was one of the, no, that's probably before then. But that was one of the,
Just briefly, are we admitting information into the record at this point? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I want information and knowledge as much as possible, but I also don't want to be caught.
Yeah.
well, I'm assuming this language was entered into the record.
Correct. This specific language, this.
And I was just offering the context of where this is actually stated as a factual. It is one of the things that was taught in that class in the geography books at the time, and so it is in acknowledgeable public information that can support and back that statement.
So we could direct staff to do more research on the
Or maybe a footnote on where I can probably find you the book that it came out of.
Well, it doesn't it say here, like, staff recommends the PC to retain the current language and encourage COID to provide additional information in the board's public hearing process? So, like, that sounds good to me.
And that's what I would like to do, because if they've got the proof in the pudding, you guys can put it in, but to have that footnote, that they bring it to the table.
I agree.
Let's just keep it clean that way. I mean, it sounds great to me, but let's just keep the process integritous. I don't know.
Integrative.
And it doesn't, anyways.
So Commissioner Cyrus, did you hear that?
Sorry.
Staff recommends that we keep the language and have COID provide their proof at the public hearing.
Perfect.
Okay. So 5 yay. 19 or nope, 20. We have 2 19s. Should narrative in chapter 14 be amended to include COID October 25, November 30 comments? And do you want to discuss that at all? Because I would just take your recommendation.
Yes, so this is on page 6 of that same handout. So it's in our chapter 14 related to energy. So COID had a few edits to this section. We felt that we were comfortable again with the intent of the edits, but the specific language that was used, we wanted to again provide some additional context regarding some community concerns that we heard. So again, incorporating their edits, but also adding some additional edits that reflect some concerns we've heard from community members. So just looking for direction to continue to amend this language essentially in partnership with COID.
That sounds really good to me because it keeps the balance that we've been shooting for this whole time. And yeah, sounds great.
Commissioner Altman?
I agree with staff recommendation.
Okay.
agree.
Commissioner, alrighty.
Perfect.
Okay. So I believe we have reviewed all of the matrices and given input on every line item, either to keep, amend, etc. At this point, we are done with our process of the 2040 comprehensive plan. And do I have any recommendations to present this plan with our input to the Board of County Commissioners?
Isn't that a yes?
The commissioners, if I may, I think we're just looking for, a motion to move this forward to the Board of County Commissioners of approval with edits and revisions as suggested by the Planning Commission.
So move.
Second.
Alrighty. Commissioner Cyrus, any input or thoughts for your motion?
This has been an extensive process. We've covered a lot of time and a lot of energy, and it's nice to finally have a document that we can move forward to the Board of Commissioners.
All right, and how will you vote?
Vote aye.
Commissioner Kelly? Commissioner Altman?
Oh, sorry.
Aye.
Commissioner Vice Chair?
Aye.
That is 5 ayes.
Okay.
And if anyone has deep opinions about this, we are also individual citizens who can attend the public hearing to voice our special interests. And on that, staff comments.
Great, I can go first. Congratulations, Planning Commissioners. Thank you very much again for your hard work. It's been 18 months, maybe more. Maybe we're up to 20 months. So again, I appreciate all of your hard work. It's been a pleasure. I think, again, this plan is much better with your review, especially the second round. I think, again, we're able to catch some things that benefited by this review and additional discussion. So really appreciate your time and efforts. Thanks.
Peter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very quick. I know it's almost 8:30. I just want to echo that this comprehensive plan, I think won a statewide award for citizen involvement. It's unprecedented to get an award at that level, at a statewide level, before the plan's acknowledged, but the magnitude of that award reflects the extensive community engagement that staff, but specifically the Planning Commission, conducted and exhibited. And I just want to compliment you and to Nathan Hovkamp, Commissioner Hovkamp, who's not here tonight, for taking the time that was necessary to go through the plan in the way that you did, even this evening, to reflect the dynamic conversation and the comments, and to look to a document or to refine a document so that it is forward thinking and it embraces the opportunities and the challenges that face our county over the next 20 years. And so that award, which was given last year, it is as much a reflection of your leadership and your commitment to citizen involvement and bringing your own viewpoints and values and life experiences to this conversation. So I can't thank you enough. And we will articulate and underscore your dedication to the Board of County Commissioners. I anticipate the hearing will be in late March or early April. We need to have a work session with them, and it will give you as much lead time as possible. But I just want to compliment you for your dedication to this document, because it's extremely important and something that, of course, is a living document, as Commissioner Kelly noted. Very quickly, short-term rentals, we talked about it just organically through the conversation of tonight's topic. But the Board of County Commissioners, it's reported in a couple of news outlets, not the bulletin, but I know KTVZ reported on it, and also the CBS affiliate did as well. But the Board of County Commissioners, in a 2-to-1 decision, there wasn't really a decision, but there wasn't a majority of commissioners who currently are in favor of establishing a short-term rental licensing program or a permitting system. So for now, the existing system will remain in place, which it's basically a transient room tax program where one receives a certificate of authority. They demonstrate that they have that they're in a primary dwelling, that they have the corresponding zoning. You can't be in farm and forest zone property. There's some coordination that the Community Development Department undertakes in the event that the registration process identifies a structure that's not a primary dwelling. And more often than not, we are evaluating that and having to engage the property owner because those investments are not permitted. So that's where we are for short-term rentals. There is a possibility that over the next several months, the board will revisit it, but there was a lengthy conversation that Stephanie and I contributed to in terms of talking about some of the legal aspects with the existing program, some of the vulnerabilities that exist with that program, as well as not only the current but the potential future demands that a short-term rental program places on the community development department from a capacity standpoint. So if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to talk to you about it or speak offline. But the short-term rental program presents some real demands on a department that we struggle with today and would struggle with tomorrow if there was a revamped aspect to the program. Lastly, a planning commission update. I'm hopeful that by tomorrow I'll get all comments from the 3 county commissioners as it pertains to their short list of candidates. So they have until I asked them respectfully to give me their short list by the end of the business day tomorrow. And then I'll likely engage them under other items on Monday during their work session just to get some direction. And if that occurs, I will be engaging with the chair and the vice chair, Commissioner Karras. Of course, you've gone through this process a couple of times. Chair Williams will bring you into the fold. But I hope that I'll get the direction on Monday in terms of who the candidates are, and then identify a schedule that works for everybody to conduct a round of interviews as each of us are matched with a county commissioners. I'm hopeful that we can go through that process and the board could appoint the at-large member in time for the March 28th meeting that we're going to have. That's when the work plan will be presented. The draft work plan for the Community Development Department will be presented to the Planning Commission for public comments. It's a great opportunity for that planning commissioner to step in, learn about the department, and read and listen to the audience or the testimony about what programs or priorities really need to be underscored for next fiscal year. So that's the plan, and we'll know more early next week. And as I get more of those details, not only will I communicate to the chair and the vice chair, but I'll send the planning commission an update of just kind of where we are, so you're caught up to speed. So anyway, those are my 2 items, and thanks again for a very productive evening. I really appreciate it.
Stephanie, I'm sorry if I overlooked you. Didn't know if you wanted to say anything.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I just want to echo what I've heard from Nicole and from Peter. You guys have done such a thorough job, really, taking each one of these items, and your thumbprints are on this for quite some time, which I think is also something you should be able to pat yourselves on the back for. It's really great to see you up there asking the questions that, really inform the decision making that you've all undertaken at this point. I'm happy to fill in a bit more. I don't really think I have anything to add on the short-term rental program item that Peter was just discussing, but we've had quite a bit of work around that, and there'll be some impacts as we go forward on his department, and we'll just see what's next. Nothing. I don't know that anything's final yet from the board, but a very lukewarm reception to that idea. So I'd be frankly pretty surprised if we're able to get anything actually adopted in that regard. But who knows? I don't know if I have anything else to comment other than just, my congratulations again to all of you. I really enjoy work on these topics with you all and with staff and with Peter. I'm just so happy to be here at Deschutes County. That's it.
Thank you. Commissioner Cyrus.
Yeah, I'd just like to express my appreciation to everybody for the nice and cordial and productive discussion. We can certainly agree to disagree and move on to the next topic, and the staff and everybody involved in finally getting through this comp plan process and on to the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Commissioner Kelly.
I kind of came in late to this comp plan process, and Nicole, I'm just so impressed by you. You're one smart cookie, and I'm just really impressed by your organization and how you prepared us to have these conversations and teeing us up. And so thank you very much for that. And thank you, to the team here. I learn every day coming here a lot, and I'm grateful to be in this position.
Commissioner Altman.
Ditto, I want to say big congratulations to you for the award. That's very impressive. And also thank you for your leadership, because it's such a huge project. And I feel like, speaking only for myself, but I would have been lost without your guidance just through the whole thing. So really good job. And I hope that we still get to see you for other things. So thank you. And thanks for being patient with us tonight. We had so much dialogue back and forth, and I'm changing my mind on this. So I appreciate your patience and just letting us work through it and finishing our job. Thank you.
Vice Chair.
I also really just want to say how much I really like the way that the plan came out. I know I alluded to this briefly last time, but it really is like a coffee table book. Like, it really is easy to read for a layperson. It has just the right amount of detail, and it's like really accessible and yet somehow still technical, but like you forget that it's technical because it's just like you're just like reading along. So I think Will said something about the comprehensive plan update, sort of like the Olympics of planning. And so I just want to say congrats on your Olympic gold medal. Yeah. And also great job running the meeting. I really just thought this was a great discussion, and just like what Commissioner Cyrus said, I really learned a lot here, and same with Commissioner Kelly. But yeah, like I just feel like I've been around for maybe like 6 years now, and I think about like just how much I've learned over that time. And I wish I could just kind of have that same experience for every single person who's interested in this kind of stuff in the county. I don't know how that happens because of resources and time and everything, but it really is just a pleasure. So thanks, everyone.
Tracy, thank you for always keeping us fed and
Yes.
getting us ready for the meetings and doing all that technical stuff. Super appreciate it. Thank you. Peter, thank you for always being able to jump in and provide some background to help us make decisions. It's the rule, the statute, just the way the county should be going. Appreciate that. And yes, you are amazing. You did a great job on this. All the open houses, the meetings in a box, everything you did to make this happen is very impressive. I wonder if you're a golfer though, using the term tee it up. Yes, I will go hit balls with you. And Commissioner Kelly, good job jumping in, not having been through this from the very beginning and really taking the time to learn about all the different chapters and putting a lot of thought into it. Thank you very much. And Commissioner Cyrus, I always learn things from you. I really liked learning about the resorts and the soils of the Willamette Valley and why we have our 24 miles. It's very informative. And this half, ladies, always, I think we are a great team, all of us. Can't wait to get a new commissioner here next month. So thank you, everyone. And at that, I will call the meeting adjourned at 8:42.